Chapter 260. The slap in the face was just the beginning. In fact, the fist that landed on Zhu Shiyao's nose was more symbolic than practical. Zhu Shiyao was different from Lu Li. She wasn't the type of person who only focused on offense without defense. When her stellar sword qi protected her body, her skin was like inlaid with countless fine diamonds, which was incomparably hard. Wang Lu's heavy punch had already used his true power, yet it still couldn't cause any real harm. Zhu Shiyao only felt a buzzing sound in her head and a nosebleed gushed out, but it was no big deal. Fortunately, when the opponent's heavy punch was about to hit her, she managed to see the perfect way to dodge. However, an ominous premonition still lingered in her heart. She was very clear that the fight was not over, and her situation was very delicate. From the other end of the sea of black fog, she had been fighting against the opponent's natal magic in her peak state. The Stardust Sword Qi and the attack that broke the giant sword were all exerted by taking advantage of the momentum. She had relied on the spirit of the long-distance attack to achieve success in one fell swoop, and not entirely built on the starry divine eyes. However, in the end, she was still blocked, not by the opponent's immortal sword, but by an inconceivably strong defense and vitality. Although she was somewhat embarrassed and somewhat reluctant, she still couldn't win even after using all her strength, which meant that the opponent's strength was beyond the scope of what she could deal with. After that sword strike, her sword momentum was exhausted, and if she continued to fight, she would lose without a doubt. Fortunately, she at least had the ability to protect herself. If she went all out in defense, she was confident that she could escape unscathed. However, the strange feeling in her heart was still there, as if something bad might happen at any time. "I've finally caught you. Come out." Along with the man's roar, Zhu Shiyao finally found the source of that strange feeling in her heart. Yes. I've made a mistake in a very important thing. The key to this fight was not to behead the demonized follower who was seduced by the sword demon, but to behead the sword demon to help the sword god merge into one, becoming the complete sword saint of Bai Li. Similarly, the opponent's target was not her, but the sword god that was attached to her body. Sure enough, when the punch, which was not particularly powerful, landed on her face again, Zhu Shiyao could clearly feel a strange power invading her body. In the next moment, the sword god let out an angry roar after being stimulated by this power. "How dare you!" At the same time, Sword God rushed out from Zhu Shiyao's body and pointed her heaven-splitting sword qi at Wang Lu. Its sharpness was not inferior to Zhu Shiyao's great sun golden brilliant sword. What was even rarer was that the sword momentum was strange, making it impossible to guard against. As the sword god of Bai Li, even though he had just been resurrected and his power was still extremely weak, his control of subtle power was still not something a newbie in the cultivation world could compare with. This sword strike might not have been as powerful as Zhu Shiyao's magical power of absolute victory, but it was still not something that Wang Lu could easily block. What's more, Wang Lu's chest had been pierced through. Although he was still alive, he couldn't use his full strength. But if Sword God made a move, would Sword Devil watch with folded arms? I've waited for a long time, and you're finally willing to show yourself. As Sword Devil's figure appeared next to Wang Lu, Sword God smiled. "I've troubled you to wait for a long time, but unfortunately, I'm not willing to accompany you." After that, Sword God whistled, and his whole body flashed. The next moment, he and Zhu Shiyao disappeared without a trace, and even the great sun golden brilliant sword that was inserted in Wang Lu's chest also disappeared. He actually escaped. Sword Devil looked solemn and said in a deep voice, "To be able to use his own spiritual power to break the shackles of your natural magical power and directly teleport away, he really deserves to inherit Zhong Shengming's orthodoxy. His power is above me. If it weren't for the Yin-Yang Sword Division formation, I'm afraid I would have been killed by him at this time." After that, Sword Devil paused and said, "It's a pity that you didn't have the last laugh after all your hard work." Wang Lu didn't care about this. the other party used a flash to barely save his life, so there's not much to be dissatisfied about. That kind of desperate escape spell can't be used indefinitely. And if we can win the first time, we can win 100 times. In this unique environment, my advantage will only snowball and they won't have a chance. Well, your fighting spirit hasn't diminished, that's good. How's your injury? Hehe, thank you for your concern. Although I lost a lot of blood, I can still recover. Well, that's good. Pay attention to recuperate. There's no need to rush. They won't immediately make a comeback after a sudden defeat. We still have time. The two of them asked and answered, showing a touch of concern in their indifferent tone. However, there was something unclear in their tone, making the dialogue seem strange. At the same time, on the other side of the black fog sea, with a flash of chaotic light, Sword God and Zhu Shiryao appeared. Sword God looked a little tired. Just now, he used his own spell to break the life source magical power, which consumed a lot of energy. If he was at his peak, the life source magical power of 100 Wang Lu would also be smashed, but now he was far from the power of his peak. As for Zhu Shiryao, her face was still indifferent, neither happy nor sad, as if the defeat just now had never happened. At this time, holding the great sun golden brilliant sword, her eyes were facing the sword light, and her mind was completely immersed in it. After a moment, the corners of her mouth slightly raised into a smile. Seeing this, Sword God couldn't help but sigh. What a sword maniac! She could immerse herself in swordsmanship at any time, but now was not the time. Sword Devil's means are unexpected. I didn't expect him to find such a powerful follower. Hehe, in just a dozen hours, his cultivation has skyrocketed 10 times. Unless it's the legendary Void Spirit root, he must have used some demonic method that can shorten his lifespan. I'm afraid that follower won't live long. But before that, I'm afraid our days won't be good. Seeing that Zhu Shiryao didn't respond at all, Sword God frowned and shouted, now is not the time to be leisurely. Zhu Shiryao's thoughts were interrupted, and she shook her head blankly, and then said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Do you think after the last battle, the opponent will still wait for us to take the initiative to attack? When that follower recovers, they will definitely take the initiative to attack. It doesn't matter. After Zhu Shiryao finished speaking, she seemed to know that the weight of this sentence was not enough, so she hesitated and added, next time, I won't lose. Won't lose next time? Sword God shook his head. Yes, Zhu Shiryao's growth speed was very fast, but the opponent was not slow either. The defeat just now seemed to be a slight difference, but with his vision, how could he not see that the slight difference was like a natural chasm? The opponent crushed him with absolute strength, and there was no solution at all. However, this situation was advantageous, because the next step, while thinking, he heard Zhu Shiryao said happily, I found a way to repair my glasses. What? Zhu Shiryao said, just now, the demon's supernatural power gave me inspiration. I can, like him, use spiritual power to condense a magic treasure, and temporarily replace the original. Sword God looked stunned, as if he couldn't believe this idea. Zhu Shiryao didn't explain much, she was bad with words, not to mention that some things to show people were more powerful than any words. So while recalling the inspiration that flashed in her mind, she began to mobilize her spiritual power, condensing a crystal on her fingertip. To condense the mysterious spiritual power into a solid, this required a very brilliant use of spiritual power. Zhu Shiryao tried it for the first time, and felt that it was extremely difficult. After a while, sweat appeared on her forehead, but the small lens on her fingertip was also constantly being melted, showing an appearance that was getting closer and closer to the original. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Zhu Shiryao let out a long breath, it's done. Saying that, with a smile on her face, she fiddled with the lens on her fingertip, and then gently put it on her left eye. This lens was not easy to refine, but for Zhu Shiyao, one lens was enough. Most of the illusion in front of her was filtered by the lens. Feeling the familiar field of vision, Zhu Shiyao's smile didn't change, and an inexplicable aura gradually rose from her body. Now, I will never lose. Although without the lens, Zhu Shiyao still retained a strong fighting power, but after wearing the lens, she was like a different person, and her aura was much stronger than before. Congratulations. Behind her, Sword God's voice seemed somewhat indifferent, but Zhu Shiyao didn't notice it. Her keenness was more reflected in the fight. In addition, her sluggishness was comparable to Lu Li. Because of her sluggishness, Zhu Shiyao spoke without any scruples, and in her excitement, she casually said, "This time, I can know who the follower of the demon is." Previously, I always felt that he looked familiar, but I couldn't see him clearly. Oh? You can see him clearly by wearing the glasses? The voice of Sword God sounded from behind her. Zhu Shiyao nodded. It's definitely possible. This exchange has confirmed my suspicions. I've probably met that person before. I'm too familiar with his core cultivation technique. If possible, I should advise him to repent, not to be the accomplice of the demon, and not to kill each other. Previously, I didn't show any mercy with my sword. If Master is here, he would probably blame me. So, should I apologize? She didn't know how long these words had been lingering in her heart, but when she said them, she didn't stumble at all. In this regard, Sword God suddenly sighed. It's really a pity. Your talent is strong, and your dedication to the way of the sword is something that I've never seen in my life. If possible, I really want to accept you as my successor. You have the stellar divine eyes, which can see through the future, so you can certainly achieve higher achievements than me. But, why do you want to bring about your own destruction? Huh? Upon hearing this, no matter how slow Zhu Shiyao was, she still felt that something was wrong. When she turned around, she didn't see the figure of Sword God. There was only a mass of red mist that blotted out the sky. At the same time, on the other side of the sea of black mist, Wang Lu, who was in the middle of healing, had nothing to do, so he asked Sword Demon a question. You said that you and Sword God are the millions of remnant souls of Zhong Shengming in the past. Although now you've grown stronger, you're still remnant souls, which means, you don't have a body? Chapter 261. Whether it was Sword God or Sword Devil, they were essentially Zhong Shengming's remnant soul. However, Sword God Bai Li was too strong. Even though it was only a remnant soul, it seemed no different from other cultivators' complete primordial spirits. Of course, a remnant soul was still a remnant soul, and there were all kinds of hidden dangers behind its power. As for the body, it was an extravagant hope. However, regarding Wang Lu's question, Sword Devil only lightly replied, for cultivators who have crossed the unity stage, the body is not important. As long as I can fuse my remnant soul, my primordial spirit, magic power, and body can completely fuse and transform with each other. Wang Lu said with a smile, that's good. I was afraid that after you went out, you would be illuminated by the sun or astral winds and yin qi, and your soul would fly away and scatter. Although you are a devil, after getting along with you, I feel that you are a bit interesting. It would be a pity if you died so casually. Humph. You should take care of yourself first. Regarding Wang Lu's disrespect, Sword Devil didn't care. Perhaps it was because Wang Lu's innate magical ability made his heart grow stronger, or perhaps Wang Lu's existence as his trump card had an extraordinary significance. However, Wang Lu's next words made him pay attention. How about we talk about the future? Sword Devil froze for a moment. Are you sick? No, I'm just curious. Wang Lu smiled. In view of our current situation, I think we are already qualified to think about the future. For example, after we defeat Sword God and you successfully usurp his position as the genuine Zhong Shengming, what do you plan to do? Sword Devil didn't answer and instead stared at Wang Lu with a very strange gaze. This is not a question you should ask. Sword Devil lightly said, in the end, what are you hesitating about? Are you afraid that I will eat you? Since the other party went straight to the point, Wang Lu thought for a moment and bluntly said, it's not strange to cook the rabbit after it's dead, but I'm not worried about this. If you want to harm me, you have too many opportunities to do so, so worrying about it is useless. But I am really curious about what you plan to do in the future. Oh? Sword Demon didn't reply. Instead, a smile appeared on his face. However, it didn't seem to be the slightest bit intimate. Wang Lu said, what are you going to do after you go out? When you were alive, you were one of the top cultivators in 9 regions. You've achieved almost everything that a cultivator could achieve. You've even broken the 4 in 9 divine tribulations. What's your plan now that you've been reborn? Transcending the tribulation to become an immortal? Or rule the 9 prefectures? The sword demon sneered, but before he could open his mouth, Wang Lu coldly said, if you want to transcend the tribulation and become an immortal or unify the 9 regions, why did you choose the Bailey province as the place to ascend? Why bother challenging the 4 in 9 heavenly tribulations? The sword god of Bailey had lived a happy life, and it was hard to imagine that he would be filled with hatred when he died. Since you don't have any regrets in your life, why bother spending 10,000 years to come back to life? As soon as Wang Lu finished speaking, Sword Demon's gaze suddenly became incomparably sharp. That was a good question. For ordinary people, survival was the instinct of all creatures. Zhong Xingming was seriously injured during his ascension, so it was natural for him to seek life in the midst of death, even after 10,000 years. So, what doubts did he have? As for after his resurrection, it was natural for him to break through the threshold that he had never crossed in his previous life. Transcending the tribulation and becoming an immortal was the ultimate dream of any cultivator. Perhaps some people would say that there were numerous cultivators in this world, but how many of them would talk about ascension all day long? Most of them didn't live a mediocre life, and even before reaching the Taoist Master King Pill realm, they would turn into a handful of dust. During this period, they would enjoy the convenience of the immortal method, far more than the pursuit of a higher realm. However, this was obviously not the same. The common people were numb to ascension because they realized that they had no hope of becoming an immortal. If there was such a chance, who would miss it? Rumor had it that the treasured land in the upper realm was like a dream, far better than the mortal world of 9 regions. As long as one could break through the heavenly tribulation and ascend to the immortal world, one would enjoy endless immortal blessings. As the saying goes, there is a reason to enjoy immortal blessings forever. However, with Zhong Xingming's amazing talent, as long as he wanted to, he would most likely ascend to the immortal world, even though in the long history, the number of true immortals who ascended to immortality was not many. Zhong Xingming was still the top figure in this long period of time. Even the 3 true immortals who later ascended to immortality in the Bailey region could not overshadow the brilliance of the Bailey sword god. However, when Zhong Xingming was almost certain to ascend to immortality, he chose to commit suicide by challenging the 4 in 9 divine tribulations. This obviously meant that in his heart, some things were more important than the immortal ascension. In other words, the immortal ascension was not that important to him. For such a figure, wouldn't it be somewhat contradictory if he painstakingly pursued resurrection in order to cross the threshold of immortal ascension? The Bailey sword god should be a hero who died with no regrets. The reason behind this was simple to say, but most people would not think about it in this direction. Only Wang Lu, who was also a person who lacked devotion to immortal cultivation, would naturally think of it in this way. Unfortunately, although this question was good, it was not raised at the right time. Sword Demon remained silent, but his eyes were getting sharper. Even if he was just a wisp of remnant soul, he still brought a strong sense of oppression. However, Wang Lu was calm and unafraid. In the past few years, when he confronted his master on the Spirit Sword Mountain, the pressure he bore was no less than what he was bearing now. And in most cases, he was the one who had the last laugh. While the two of them were silently confronting each other, Wang Lu suddenly let out a soft cry of surprise. He put his hand into his pocket and touched a booklet. It was the Lingjian School's team leader's handbook. At this time, it was very hot. He didn't open it in front of Sword Demon. Instead, he reached out and touched the inside page, and his heart immediately understood. The situation had changed and worsened. His big sister Zhu Shuryao's page suddenly turned from orange to red. Moreover, it was so red that it turned purple, and then it turned black. This meant that his senior sister's situation had changed from a difficult situation to a dangerous situation, or even a dead situation. Once the color completely turned black, Wang Lu could directly tear off the page and burn it for her. But this was completely unreasonable. Everything was fine, so how could the situation suddenly deteriorate? Just now, in the fierce fight, although Zhu Shiryao and the others lost, they didn't suffer any serious injuries. At most, they only had a few liters of nosebleeds. It would be ridiculous to say that the situation worsened because of excessive blood loss. Or could it be that after losing the last fight, the two of them were eager to win, so they began to practice some kind of evil method? Last time, his senior sister suffered a loss in close combat, so she switched to long-range combat. In order to quickly improve her strength, did she cut something that shouldn't be cut? Unfortunately, as long as he thought about it a little more, these conjectures seemed absurd. Therefore, an even more absurd conjecture came to his mind. At the same time, Sword Demon's expression also changed. He immediately looked at Wang Lu and said, "It seems that you also know." Wang Lu nodded and was about to speak when a violent wave of magic power surged from afar. When he turned his head to look, a jaw-dropping scene came into view. In the distance, the vast sea of black fog suddenly surged, and countless stars flickered in the darkness. In a moment, half of the Black Sea was as bright as day. The bright star river tore the darkness apart, and countless lightning bolts gathered in the boundary between light and darkness, intensifying the turbulence of space. And in the center of the strange change, a graceful woman held an immortal sword in her hand. The sword light flickered, causing the stars in the black fog to crazily roll. If it wasn't Zhu Shiryao, who else could it be? Seeing this scene, Wang Lu couldn't calm down no matter what. His mouth was wide open, and his pupils rapidly contracted. "I want to complain, I want to report. This cheater has no lower limit. Be careful." Just when Wang Lu was shocked by this strange change, Sword Demon raised all his spirit. After a loud shout, he suddenly raised his hand to grab Wang Lu and dodged to the side. The next moment, in the distance, Zhu Shiryao showed a trace of a ferocious smile and swung the great sun golden brilliant sword downward. Suddenly, the stars in the sky fell, and the star river flowed to the ground, sweeping up the black fog and lightning all over the sky. For a moment, it seemed that the world was collapsing, and the end of the world had arrived. This kind of power was not something that could be measured by Shudan, King Pill, and so on. In this closed world, it was wrapped in a huge amount of black fog. This blow was the anger of the world, and it was the 49 heavens' retribution. No matter what kind of magical power it was absolutely impossible to compete with it. And the collapse of the world was also unavoidable. However, Sword Demon reacted at the fastest speed and flashed to the side with Wang Lu. Although he couldn't dodge the attack, he boarded a boat. The Sea of Bitterness boat. It was also at this time that Wang Lu realized that this Sea of Bitterness boat was indeed worthy of its reputation. In addition to braving the wind and breaking the waves in the vast Sea of Bitterness, when misfortune came, it was a shelter that would protect you to tide over the difficulties. The moment Sword Demon and Wang Lu boarded the Sea of Bitterness boat, the stars and lightning finally fell to the ground, triggering a boundless tide of destruction. But in the tide, there was no trace of the sea of bitterness boat. Time is limited, so don't talk nonsense. In a narrow space, Wang Lu and Sword Demon stood opposite to each other. Their complexions were incomparably solemn. In the silence, Sword Demon was the first to open his mouth, leading the topic. The situation is very simple. Zhu Shiryao is possessed by the sword god. Before he finished speaking, he was interrupted by Wang Lu coldly. Possessed? I think it's possession. Sword Demon closed his eyes. No matter what, the other party's strength is far above you and me. Wang Lu sneered. If you want to contend against him, you have to do the same thing. Do you want to possess me? Then fully display your Mahayana supreme level consciousness and skills to contend against the sword god in the same situation? Sword Demon asked, or do you have a better way? Wang Lu thought for a moment. I don't think so. Then you. Just as Sword Demon opened his mouth, he saw a sword light coming straight at him. But he didn't panic. He moved sideways, raised his hand, and blocked the sword light. At the same time, his tone didn't change. Don't waste time with internal strife. Wang Lu didn't speak. He casually flipped the sword of Mount Kun and launched his original magical ability. Within a radius of 300 meters, broken swords were like a forest, and the blood-colored sky was covered with dark clouds. Surrounded by broken swords, Sword Demon just sighed. If you want to kill me, it's not difficult, but it won't do you any good. Wang Lu just urged thousands of broken swords to float in the air, and his killing intent became more and more intense. I think killing you is the right choice. There are some things I don't say, but it doesn't mean I didn't think about it. Previously, when I fought with Sword God for the first time, you infused me with heaven-splitting sword chi. It seemed to help me, but in fact, it was to confuse me, right? I've always felt strange. I have no enmity with senior sister, so why did she want to kill me? Later, I thought that maybe senior sister's eyesight is bad, and she didn't recognize me when she saw my devil chi. And where did my devil chi come from? Regarding this, Sword Demon didn't hide it. Yes, I infused you with devil chi, but if I didn't, I'm afraid you and your senior sister would have joined forces and turned around to kill me. Hey, you always like to talk reason, so tell me, am I in the wrong? Wang Lu didn't hesitate. I am in the wrong. After I kill you, I will burn the inspection report for you. After saying that, thousands of flying swords fell to the ground. Chapter 262. It's useless. Following Sword Demon's indifferent words, the dust that filled the sky slowly fell to the ground. In front of Wang Lu was a dense forest formed by the wreckage of swords. Tens of thousands of broken swords were gathered in one place, emitting an aura of destruction that would strike fear into one's heart. However, at this moment, a tall and lonely figure stepped lightly on the sword forest, wearing a pure robe that was spotless. Now is not the time for infighting. Sword Demon faintly said. He looked at Wang Lu, who was frowning, and said, similarly, you don't have the capital for internal strife. Your void spirit root is indeed powerful, but before your Tao is condensed, you don't have the qualifications to hurt me. Even if it's a remnant soul, it's still a remnant soul of the Mahayana stage. Wang Lu said nothing. Moreover, even if you kill me, it won't change anything. Perhaps you can indeed escape because of this, but for you, escaping on your own is probably not even a passing mark, right? Don't you want senior sister's life? Wang Lu remained silent. Sword Demon said, what you said about possession is not wrong. What Sword God did is to occupy Zhu Shiryao's jade mansion and body. However, this matter is not without a turning point. His situation is the same as mine, just a wisp of remnant soul. Therefore, your senior sister's soul didn't fly away and scatter. At present, she still has the leeway to struggle at death's door. Pausing for a moment, Sword Demon said in a deep voice, "But if you really have the ability to kill me and return my remnant soul, then the Sword God's merit will be complete. Then, there will no longer be a place for your senior sister's soul to reside in that shell." Hearing this, although Wang Lu did not speak, he put away the sword of Mount Kun. "I know you have a lot of doubts, but now is not the time to explain them one by one. The time that the crossing adversity boat could buy was limited, and they could not afford to waste any more time. Listen carefully, the other party's decision to possess Zhu Shiyao was both a crisis and an opportunity. While he suddenly became stronger, he also had to face a huge hidden danger. If not for this, he wouldn't have waited until now. So if we want to reverse the situation, we can't waste this opportunity." Wang Lu said, "In the end, you want to take over the body. As I said, if you have a better idea, just do it." Wang Lu sneered, but he was silent in his heart. He was indeed worthy of being the person who swept across the 9 regions 10,000 years ago. Even his remnant soul was so powerful. The old man had really seen through his temperament and was simply fearless. Just now, he launched a rain of swords attack with his original magical ability, but it was futile. Actually, Wang Lu did not feel discouraged. In the space of his original magical ability, he still had too many means. So what if it was Mahayana stage? A remnant soul would always have a flaw. What really concerned Wang Lu was the Sword Demon's last words: even if he killed the Sword Demon, he wouldn't be able to save his senior martial sister. Instead, his senior martial sister would immediately die. Because of this, Wang Lu was truly hesitant. Of course, it was reasonable to say that no one else's life was more important than his own. Under such a dilemma, it was understandable for Wang Lu to place righteousness before family, but was he that kind of person? Wasn't it all for the sake of rescuing his senior sister? When he went deep into this place, didn't he consider that there would be danger? But in the end, he still came. So since he came, he shouldn't let all his previous efforts go to waste and let his original decision become worthless. But on the other hand, was it because of a momentary decision that he had to sacrifice his own life? Wang Lu, time is running out, don't be indecisive. Listening to the urging of the Sword Demon, Wang Lu raised his head, looked at him deeply, and then burst into a smile. "I have made up my mind. Sword Demon, oh. I decided." Wang Lu took a deep breath and looked at the Sword Demon's deep eyes. "I want to do it alone." After a long silence, the Sword Demon asked, "Are you sick?" Wang Lu said, "I have a chance to win." After that, he took out the team leader's handbook from his bosom, tore off Zhu Shiyao's page, and held it in his hand. "Moreover, I'm not alone." In the sea of black fog, the wind and clouds were surging. At the center of the changes was a woman with an elegant appearance. Her expression was anxious and uneasy. Her hand that held the sword trembled slightly, showing that her patience was rapidly wearing away. She, or he, was waiting for the boat to appear from the mustard seed space. Then, it would be a thunderous attack. He must not give the opponent any chance. Looking at the current situation, he already had an overwhelming advantage. Although he was the first to reveal his final trump card, which was hurried and embarrassing, and even cut off his own path of retreat, when he revealed his trump card, he had the upper hand. If that person wanted to live, the only way was to choose to take over his body like he did. Although that meant that both of their fates were destined to be miserable, at least he was the winner, and there was still hope. Next, he would wait for that person to appear from the boat and then fight. In theory, he obviously had the upper hand. Whether it was the body or the body, his team was the strongest. As he was thinking, his eyebrows slightly moved. He was sensitive to the change in the space, as if something was about to break out of the cage. He immediately raised his vigilance, and the great sun golden brilliant sword in his hand glowed, ready to fight at any time. Then, he saw the figure that he had been looking forward to for a long time. Wang Lu, holding the sword of Mount Kun, slowly walked out from the void. His pace was filled with strong self-confidence and extraordinary imposing manner. Behind him, Sword Demon looked solemn. Wait, Sword Demon. How could there be Sword Demon? He looked at the figure that was exactly the same as him in disbelief, and the surprise in his heart was indescribable. Why was he here? He should have already possessed Wang Lu and merged with him. Now, could it be that he failed to possess Wang Lu? Yes, it was quite possible. Although Wang Lu had amazing potential, he was difficult to control, or even impossible to control at all. It was also because of this, coupled with some other factors, that he did not choose him as his successor. But unexpectedly, Zhu Shiyao, who seemed to be the easiest to deal with, still had a problem. He had clearly secretly destroyed her eyes, but in the end, she actually figured out a way to control herself. He was forced to make the first move before the matter was exposed. It was a pity that a good seedling was wasted. But this little regret was soon replaced by ecstasy in his heart. Since Sword Demon did not choose to possess Wang Lu, it was the best. He could completely win, instead of losing both sides. Although he was also wondering why Wang Lu wanted to die, the situation had developed to this point. Should he shrink back because of this doubt? When he chose to possess Wang Lu, there was no way back. So he resolutely made a move. The stars in the sky moved according to his heart, and the terrifying aura that could destroy heaven and earth filled the air. Even if it was only a remnant soul, it was still a remnant soul of the great vehicle stage. Once he had a body to rely on, his power was still extremely powerful. But at the same time, Wang Lu also made his own response. He looked at the elegant woman not far away and said softly, "Senior sister, are you so useless?" "Senior sister?" Sword God sneered in his heart. "Your senior sister has long been suppressed to the point that she can't move, struggling at death's door. If it weren't for my incomplete soul at this time, making some corners difficult to touch, I would have already destroyed her soul. What's the use of calling her at this time? Do you want to use her to cause internal strife in my body so that you can reap the benefits?" Whimsical. But at this time, he suddenly felt a strange fluctuation blooming in his body, as if a pile of dead ashes began to reignite. This time, Sword God was really taken aback. He didn't expect Zhu Shiyao to be so tenacious. She was suppressed by him to the point that her soul almost flew away, but at this time, she still had the strength to fight with him. However, this was just a desperate struggle of a cornered beast. Zhu Shiyao's body and Jade Mansion had been occupied by him, and there was only a trace of space left in the space where her primordial spirit was residing. The influence that she could exert was extremely limited. It was impossible for her to hold him back in the fight. For example, now, although she tried her best to rouse her soul, trying to regain contact with her body, in fact, her body was steadily holding the great sun golden brilliant sword and slowly falling down. When the sword fell to the ground, the world once again collapsed, and this time, there would never be a sea of bitterness surpassing adversity boat to save them. In the eyes of Sword God, he had clearly seen the opponent, under the absolute crushing power, desperately trying to resist, but in vain, they were turned into ashes. Of course, this ashes did not include Wang Lu. This kid's life was still useful, but Sword Demon could not be left alive. As the stars in the sky fell, Sword God even clearly saw the expression of his old rival before his death. There was a bit of relief and a bit of uneasiness. His lips opened and closed, but he didn't know whether it was the most vicious curse or a sigh of emotion. However, all of this had nothing to do with him. The story of the loser was doomed to be destroyed, and only the winner could sing generously. But, did he win just like that? Wasn't it too simple? In a trance, Sword God found it hard to believe. However, at this time, a cold touch came from his forehead. The chill from his forehead spread all over his body in an instant, causing Sword God to tremble involuntarily. While trembling, everything in front of him collapsed like broken bubbles. The space that was torn by the incomparably powerful sword Qi, the remains of Sword Demon that were cut into pieces by him, and Wang Lu, who was stunned by the aftermath of the falling stars, all disappeared. And the great sun golden brilliant sword in his hand, for some reason, was still held high above his head. The primal chaos heaven-splitting sword Qi was brewing in both sides of the blade, but it had not been released yet. But the opponent's sword of Mount Kun had already pierced his forehead. What's going on? Can't tell the real from the fake? Poor guy. Wang Lu's sneer was so harsh, but unfortunately, Sword God had no time to fight back. The tip of the sword of Mount Kun surged with a power that he hated. Primal Chaos Heart Demon God destroying Sword Qi. This was Sword Demon's unique skill, which specialized in destroying primordial spirit. Even though it was displayed by Wang Lu, and its power was greatly reduced compared to the original version, it still could not be underestimated. Sword God was caught off guard and was immediately shaken by this sword strike, causing his soul to tremble and his primordial spirit to crack. Just as Sword God struggled to fight back, the scene in front of him changed again. He clearly saw Wang Lu being torn apart under his sword, and Sword Demon, who was in a semi-possessed state behind him, died miserably. Every detail was seen in a panoramic view. But soon, these scenes became illusions again. Wang Lu had already pasted a talisman on his body. Seal of God. This time, all the magical powers of Sword God were sealed, and even the anger of his primordial spirit was suppressed. The seal of God released close to his body destroyed his last chance of winning. Although possessing Zhu Shiryao could exert a powerful strength, he was caught off guard and was hit twice in a row, so he was powerless to reverse the situation. After being hit twice in a row inexplicably, a light flashed in Sword God's heart, shining through the haze. Zhu Shiryao, it's you. Is it you who rashly used your innate magical power to hinder me? In his primordial spirit, although Zhu Shiryao's voice was weak, it sounded very firm. This is not your magical power, don't even think about taking it away. Then, Wang Lu's voice also squeezed in, after sealing Sword God's primordial spirit, his primordial spirit was almost defenseless. Senior sister did a good job, but Sword God, please die obediently. You are a senior cultivator, don't make yourself look too ugly. Ha, you think you won? All of you shall be buried with me. While laughing wildly, cracks suddenly appeared on Sword God's tightly locked primordial spirit. Wang Lu immediately used the second and third seal of God, building an unbreakable barrier to prevent him from dying indiscriminately. But after Sword God's primordial spirit shattered, there was no violent explosion as expected. On the contrary, in the middle of the fragment, a black hole appeared, and then, an irresistible suction force sucked everything in. Chapter 263. It was pitch black. There was no light in his line of sight. Of course, it was a bit far-fetched to say that he could see, because right now, Wang Lu had no eyes at all. At this time, his primordial spirit was in an out-of-body state. Just now, he used the combination of God Extinguishing Sword and God Seal to seriously injure Sword God. When Sword God was defeated, he chose to perish together with him. Then, a primordial spirit black hole suddenly appeared and directly pulled his primordial spirit out of his body. What was the principle of this black hole? For the time being, it was not known. Because in theory, the body tempered by non-phase method could be called an iron wall, so how could it be so easy to pull out the primordial spirit? If Sword God could tear other people's primordial spirit at will, he would have done it long ago. Why would he wait until now? However, from the current situation, Wang Lu had completely lost his physical perception. His perception of the surrounding was as if his five senses had been melted into a ball, which was very mysterious and familiar. This was exactly the perspective of his Jade Mansion, also known as Divine Sense, Primordial Spirit Acquaintance. However, at this time, it was not the inner view cultivation, so the location of the primordial spirit could not be determined. Wang Lu controlled his primordial spirit to disassemble his divine sense, which was similar to the perception of the five senses of the body. A moment later, Wang Lu saw himself in the darkness. It was still the successor-disciple uniform, the red and white robe that he had worn for 10 years. This image was Wang Lu's most intuitive perception of himself, so the primordial spirit form was like this. After disassembling his divine sense, Wang Lu soon saw a bit of light in the darkness. After walking toward the light for a while, his field of vision gradually widened. Soon, in the middle of the light, Zhu Shiyao's figure was clearly discernible. Seeing that slender and slightly delicate figure, Wang Lu immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He did not hesitate to take the risk to come here from the Eight Gates trial just for this awe-inspiring and dignified big sister. Although there were such contradictions in the middle, and the current situation was far from optimistic, Wang Lu still smiled and greeted, "Senior sister, I trust you've been well since we last met." Upon hearing his voice, Zhu Shiyao turned her head. Obviously, she was also very accustomed to the way of communication between primordial spirit and body. Upon hearing Wang Lu's greeting, she somewhat doubtfully asked, "Who are you? Calling me senior sister, is that a junior brother from the Spirit Sword Mountain?" Wang Lu was shocked. Bastard, pretending not to know after stabbing someone. However, Zhu Shiyao quickly explained, "My stellar divine eye's divine ability hasn't reached great success, so my perception ability is flawed. Junior martial brother, please show me the sword art you're good at." Wang Lu was startled again. "Traitor son, you speak so smoothly. Is your tongue straight?" On second thought, he realized that Zhu Shiyao could only express herself fluently when she was communicating with her primordial spirit like this. On the other hand, displaying the sword technique that he was most proficient in for identification. Could it be that you recognize people based on their sword techniques? With this thought in mind, Wang Lu activated his primordial spirit and released the non-phase sword light. Zhu Shiyao's eyes suddenly lit up. "Ah, it's the non-phase sword. Fifth martial uncle's non-phase sword. You're Wang Lu. Young girl, you really have good eyesight. You don't recognize my face that can make young girls dream about, but you can clearly recognize my sword light when it's just beginning to shine." What a strange fetish this was. A person has all kinds of characteristics, but you just have to find the unpopular one. Zhu Shiyao said confidently, "What do other characteristics have to do with me? I only care about the sword technique." After a pause, she said, "Sure enough, it's you. I vaguely felt that you were familiar before, but I really didn't remember. I didn't show any mercy before, I'm really sorry." Wang Lu didn't care. It was beneath his dignity to argue too much with a disabled person. "It doesn't matter, I understand." Zhu Shiyao was quite surprised that Wang Lu was so easy to talk to. The apology that she had prepared in her heart for a long time suddenly couldn't be said. She opened her mouth, but didn't know what to say. She could only blink her pair of seemingly bright big eyes, revealing a blank and innocent expression. There was an awkward silence between the two, and then Zhu Shiyao said, "Junior martial brother, are you also here to compete for the sword god's inheritance?" Wang Lu said snappily, "I'm here to save you. You've always been orange-red in the team leader's handbook, so obviously you're trapped. As the team leader, of course I have to find you. Later, I heard that you became the godfather of an ancient sword god, but the handbook was always orange. I knew that your situation wasn't good, and most likely you were tricked. It's a pity that I didn't have the chance to explain it to you." Zhu Shiyao was stunned for a long time before saying, "Oh." After a long time, she said, "Thank you. You're welcome. I didn't save you anyway, and I even lost myself." As Wang Lu said this, he looked at the vast darkness around him, but it seemed even deeper than the endless sea of bitterness. The sea of bitterness was boundless, but at least there was black fog churning around him, making people realize that this place wasn't dead silent. But at this moment, other than the spot where Wang Lu and Zhu Shiyao were standing, the rest was empty. They were probably trapped by some ancient divine ability when the sword god self-destructed. If they wanted to break out, they didn't know how. After a long period of silence, he heard Zhu Shiyao say, "Junior brother, you." Wang Lu waved his hand. "I'm fine. It's the duty of the team leader to share weal and woe with the teammates. No matter what you think, when we left the mountain, Master and Uncle asked me to take care of everyone, so I have to shoulder the burden. Besides, the situation is not that bad now. It's better for two people to be trapped than for one person to die. At least we can still think of a way. What I want to say is, you're really weak." Wang Lu was stunned for the time it took to drink a cup of tea. His heart was like a raging sea. "Big sister, are you King asking for a beating? I worked so hard to come here to save you, but you just stabbed me and scolded me. You're like the Pan Jinlian who abandoned her ex-husband and hired a gang of gangsters to break people's legs." Zhu Shiyao said, "What I want to say is that Master once told me that you're the lead disciple of the Spirit Sword Mountain, and in all aspects, you're above me. In the future, you're likely to inherit the position of the sect leader. However, in the previous two fights, your strength is really weak. At least, you're not stronger than me." With that, she was somewhat indignant, as if she disapproved of her master's evaluation. Wang Lu's voice sank. Did the sect leader say that? As the lead disciple of the Spirit Sword Mountain, in the future, he would inherit the position of the sect leader? Was that what Feng Yin Daoist master intended to do? Although the Heavenly Sword Hall elders had vaguely hinted at this, it was unexpected for Feng Yin Daoist master to make such an obvious statement. Yes, in the current Lingjian school, the only one in the younger generation who could assume the position of sect leader was Wang Lu. Lu Li and Zhu Shiyao's strength were enough, but in other aspects, they were far from enough. As for Wen Bao, Yu Xinyao, and the others, they were also excellent cultivators, but compared to Wang Lu, they were far behind. But, this was the position of the sect leader of one of the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League. Well, let's wait and see. Feng Yin Daoist master's appearance looked old, but in fact, he only cultivated for more than 200 years. With his deity stage cultivation base, he was already at the age of committing a crime. He still had a long way to go, so there was no need to care about the sect leader. However, what was the meaning of Big Sister's attitude? Was she dissatisfied with him, the future sect leader? So, senior sister, do you think you're more suitable to be the sect leader? Zhu Shiyao said, I don't want to. If Master thinks you're suitable, then it should be right. I don't look at people, I only look at swords. Therefore, perhaps you're very suitable to be the sect leader of Spirit Sword Sect, but your swordsmanship is not strong enough. Wang Lu was amused. Loser, do you have the nerve to say that? Zhu Shiyao immediately stuck out her chest. I didn't lose. In terms of swordsmanship, I'm still stronger. Previously, I lost because my glasses were broken, so I was a bit slow in grasping the opportunity. At that time, my condition was not good. With that, she suddenly had a flash of inspiration. It's like, if one day, you're seriously injured, and I defeat you, does that mean I'm stronger than you? Wang Lu asked, the strength that can only be displayed by relying on the glasses is not called strength. If one day, I take a demon disintegration pill or something, and my strength soars by 10 times, and I can crush you like an ant, do you think I'm 10 times stronger than you? However, Zhu Shiyao said, the glasses are not a foreign object, but an important support that closely matches my cultivation technique. When I achieve Jindan and the Great Tao is formed, I can internalize foreign objects. In short, the glasses are an inseparable part of me. Puff. An inseparable part? Wang Lu was about to spit. He thought to himself that although this eldest senior sister often looked like she had a screw loose in her head, she would occasionally say something shocking. If one day she found an ancient swordsmanship manual and learned that it was necessary to practice it, would she be conflicted about being inseparable? Words are not convincing. Since you stubbornly believe that you're stronger, then when we get out of here, let's have a one-on-one duel in the arena of Ethereal Peak. The loser will call me father. How about that? It's a deal. Zhu Shiyao's eyes shone with eagerness. To her, being able to duel with an expert in swordsmanship was more attractive than anything else. Although she had belittled Wang Lu's swordsmanship cultivation, she only felt that Wang Lu's swordsmanship was slightly weaker than hers. It was difficult to predict the outcome of an actual battle, so he was the perfect opponent for a duel. But the problem now is how to get out, and first of all, where is this place? Deep in a dilemma, Wang Lu did not panic. Instead, he methodically began to analyze the situation rationally, trying to find a solution. This darkness seemed to be unsolvable, but Wang Lu believed that there would always be a way out. Why go through so much trouble? If there's no way out, then we'll cut a way out. After Zhu Shiyao finished speaking, the starry sword light bloomed from her primordial spirit. Wang Lu was too lazy to deal with such an idiot who only had swords in her mind. You do what you need to do, I'm going to think. Looking at Zhu Shiyao, who was constantly trying to cut through the darkness with her sword qi, Wang Lu suddenly thought of something while lamenting the persistence of this sword maniac. He and Zhu Shiyao were both in the primordial spirit state, but with their cultivation, it was impossible for their primordial spirits to be directly exposed. Before advancing to the nascent soul realm, in theory, the primordial spirit was extremely fragile. It was the cultivator's purple palace that protected the primordial spirit until it was strong enough to move independently. So now, the place where their primordial spirits were, could it be, thinking of the situation where Zhu Shiyao's body was taken over, Wang Lu's mind flashed like lightning. Holy shit, it can't be. This boundless emptiness and darkness was actually caused by Zhu Shiyao's purple palace being forcibly expanded by a quasi-true immortal's remnant soul. Wang Lu looked at the eldest senior sister in shock, who was still in a daze. Eldest senior sister, you're really tolerant. Chapter 264. Nowadays, when the cultivators mentioned the ancient times, most of them yearned for it. Although it was shameful to say that the modern people were not as good as the ancient people, before the age of chaos, the surrounding spiritual energy was rich, and it was an indisputable fact that there were many powerful people. Right now, the number one cultivator in 9 regions was Supreme Hichu of Xingjing sect, who was only at the peak of unity stage, half a step away from the Mahayana stage. However, this half a step gap was only crossed by a few people in thousands of years. Moreover, all of them overdrafted their potential, and after reaching the Mahayana stage, there was no hope for further progress. As for crossing the tribulation to become an immortal, it was really just a legend. Compared to before the age of chaos, it was really incomparable. However, for the knowledgeable people, saying that the present was not as good as the ancient was just a general statement. Although the age of chaos was a catastrophe, the efforts of thousands of years of cultivators were not without results. Compared to the ancient times, although the current cultivators were a bit behind in terms of stage, there were too many tricks in the same stage. In a simple and crude way, the current cultivators' basic points were low, but their bonus points were relatively high, and overall, they were not too inferior. For example, the 9-tailed fox that wreaked havoc in Blue River region decades ago should have reached the true immortal stage, but wasn't it still suppressed and sealed in the body of the lady boss? In the past, if the sect leader was just a deity stage cultivator, the other party could destroy the sect with just a tail. Therefore, even though Zhong Xingming had a frighteningly high stage when he was alive, breaking through the 4 in 9 divine tribulations, but considering, first, he was just a remnant soul, second, as a modern cultivator, he had a super high bonus. So what if the other party was a peak Mahayana stage cultivator? Looking at the vast and boundless dark hall, Wang Lu tried to use this reason to persuade himself to overcome the difficulty. The peak Mahayana stage was not invincible. In fact, it was because of the previous God Extermination Sword and God Seal that the Sword God was forced into a desperate situation that he had to use his primordial spirit self-detonation. However, even if he lost, it was only because the Sword God was too weak at that time, and behind him was the Sword Demon, who was not inferior to the Sword God. A Mahayana stage cultivator was by no means as simple as high stage. Only by seeing this endless darkness could one truly realize the distance of the Mahayana stage. The other party was just a wisp of remnant soul that stayed in the Purple Mansion for a short time, but it had already left behind earth-shaking changes. This vast space was the expansion of the Purple Mansion to accommodate the primordial spirit of the Mahayana stage. For a Shudan stage cultivator, it was simply boundless. Although the power and strength of the soul could not be measured by the size, faced with the difference of thousands or even hundreds of millions of times, who could argue with them in a dignified manner? The power of the Mahayana stage was displayed in this most intuitive way, and in this case, it would be useless to say anything more. The only good thing was that when the situation changed, a countermeasure would surface. At this time, they weren't imprisoned in some dangerous place, but in Zhu Shiyao's Purple Palace. But because of the expansion of the Purple Palace, their primordial spirits seemed too small. The problem here was that under normal circumstances, the Purple Mansion and the primordial spirit should be highly compatible. The primordial spirit's control over magic power and physical body was based on this compatibility. Using a more theoretical description, it was only when the primordial spirit and the Purple Mansion were compatible that the signal could be transmitted without any hindrance. Zhu Shiyao's primordial spirit was suspended in the air, unable to contact the outside world. Thus, it was as if she was imprisoned. The solution was also simple. As long as she could get in touch with the Purple Mansion again, she could retract it. As a cultivator with Sword Spirit Root, Zhu Shiyao's root bone aptitude was the best in the world, and the adaptability of the Purple Mansion was also good enough. However, the premise was that the primordial spirit must be able to connect with the Purple Mansion. Judging from the current situation, Zhu Shiyao really didn't know how long it would take before her primordial spirit could expand to fill the entire Purple Mansion, and it might even take forever. The cultivation of the primordial spirit was not independent, it must be complemented with the tempering of the physical body. However, the depths of the Sword Tomb were isolated from the main path. In theory, it was impossible to even achieve the King Pill, so how could the primordial spirit be catalyzed to the level close to the Mahayana stage? In addition to this, the only way was to take an unconventional path, not to advance the primordial spirit, but to expand for the sake of expansion. However, there were also obstacles in doing this. With the Shudan stage's primordial spirit, after expanding thousands of times, it would inevitably lead to the soul flying away and scattering. Wang Lu cultivated the non-phase method, so his primordial spirit was much more condensed than ordinary cultivators. However, in a short period of time, the expansion of his primordial spirit by dozens of times was already the limit. If it expanded any further, he would have to bear the loss. And according to the current situation, without the expansion of tens of thousands of times, it was impossible to fully reach the Purple Mansion. Tens of thousands of times. No matter how it was calculated, at least it would be after reaching the King Pill realm. Therefore, this road was tantamount to being sealed. In fact, the Sword God blew up his primordial spirit and formed a black hole to trap the two of them in this place, of course, was not to let them easily find a way out. According to the current situation, what was waiting for Wang Lu and Zhu Shiyao would be exhaustion and death after a long time. Of course, there was also a problem here. That was, Sword God completely ignored the existence of another person. However, Wang Lu could not count on that sword demon to help him. At present, he could only consider self-reliance, although his own way to solve the problem has been cut off. Although the way to solve this problem had been cut off, it was better for two people to be trapped than one person. Fortunately, when one person couldn't do anything, he could ask the other person for help. After telling Zhu Shiyao about his speculation, Zhu Shiyao blinked and asked, "And then?" Wang Lu said, "Senior sister, please inflate." Of course, this was a joke. Even with the condensed primordial spirit of Wang Lu, it couldn't inflate thousands of times. Although the eldest senior sister's attainments in Sword Dao were astonishingly high, it was impossible for her primordial spirit to be better than his. Wang Lu only hoped that Zhu Shiyao could stand from the point of view of a top sword cultivator and give him advice to stimulate his inspiration. Unexpectedly, after listening to Wang Lu's words, Zhu Shiyao just nodded. Okay. Then, she began to inflate. Although it was slow, it gradually expanded as if it couldn't be stopped. Wang Lu gawked for a moment, and then hurriedly opened his mouth to dissuade her. Hey, don't take things too hard. If you're scared out of your wits because of my words, I would feel that my previous efforts to defeat you would be greatly devalued. However, Zhu Shiyao didn't seem to hear Wang Lu's words. No wonder there's a familiar aura here. It turns out to be my purple mansion. In that case, I just need to let my light cover this place. As she spoke, Zhu Shiyao took a deep breath as she slowly inflated. Let there be light. The next moment, the light shone brightly. It was both bright and cold silver starlight and blazing like fire golden sunlight. Yin and yang combined and changed. It was the peerless secret of Lingjian School Star Peak, Star Sword Light. In an instant, feeling the star sword light surrounding his body, Wang Lu shook his head helplessly. He really underestimated the eldest senior sister's supernatural power. He also got a simple concept wrong. In theory, the inflating of the primordial spirit indeed needed to be more condensed so that it wouldn't lose its shape during the inflating process. However, too much condensing would affect the inflating process. But for the eldest senior sister, the situation was completely different. The star sword technique that she cultivated was the world's first-class sword technique with many variations. The power of her, one sword to break all techniques, was also the result of returning to simplicity after experiencing all the flourishing. And for such a versatile technique, it was actually very easy to inflate the primordial spirit. Of course, it wasn't a volume expansion in a strict sense, but a transformation of the state of the primordial spirit into light. Where the light was, the God was. This was the eldest senior sister's primordial spirit. TSK, I really can't help but admire her. And at the moment when the light flashed, Wang Lu was forcibly ejected from the purple mansion. Zhu Shiyao had occupied every inch of space in the purple mansion, and there was no place for Wang Lu to stand. After being ejected, Wang Lu only felt that everything in front of him was dark and bright, and in the blink of an eye, he returned to his original body. And in front of him, there was no longer the incomparably dazzling figure of the eldest senior sister, but a cold and old face. You're awake? Very good, faster than I expected. After that, the sword demon stood up and said to Wang Lu, get up, and then accompany me for a chat. Wang Lu nodded silently and looked around as he got up. It was still the place where he defeated the sword god, and the sea of bitterness around him was slowly swaying. The eldest senior sister, who had just been possessed, was lying quietly at his feet, looking serene, completely different from the heroic appearance of a sword in her hand. Wang Lu was not surprised. Transforming the form and expanding the primordial spirit by thousands of times, although it was a unique magical ability of the stellar sword method. The eldest senior sister, who was trying to reach the level of Desheng stage at the Shidan stage, must have carried a great burden. It was good that she was still there. Looking at her rosy complexion and normal breathing, she was most likely just exhausted. Her situation is good. Seeing what Wang Lu was thinking, the sword demon said lightly, using the magical ability of the stellar sword method to transform the primordial spirit, she thought of it and did it. After this time, if she can survive, the power of her primordial spirit will double in the future. Survive? Wang Lu keenly caught the point. What if she didn't survive? Only death. The sword demon said, but put her matter aside, let's talk about us. Wang Lu was stunned for a moment, and then cupped his hands and said, so, in view of the sword god's death, should I congratulate you for your success? In fact, during the resuscitation, Wang Lu had already seen that the sword demon in front of him was very different from the previous one. Although he was still a remnant soul, after the death of the sword god, his imposing manner had undergone a tremendous change. However, it was not the kind of sudden, 10,000 times more intense, but somewhat mysterious and indescribable. If one had to say, the current sword demon was more in line with the image of an ancient true immortal in Wang Lu's imagination. Although the original sword demon also had a strong sense of oppression, and when the truth of many things was revealed, it made people feel even more depressed, but that was all. The sword demon in front of him had gone beyond the sense of oppression, which made people unable to perceive and ponder. The so-called heaven's power was unpredictable, describing this situation. The primordial spirit of a Desheng stage cultivator was so powerful. Changed? The sword demon shook his head. I just took back what I deserve. Chapter 265. Get back what you deserve? Sword demon's simple words revealed a message that wasn't simple at all. What was deserved? Sword demon was obviously the reincarnation of the primordial spirit of the sword god of Baili, a usurper who was contaminated by the demonic creature. Shouldn't his fate be crushed by justice and crushed to pieces? Why did he say that? However, when sword demon indifferently said those words, Wang Lu felt that he was not very surprised. Because before this, he had already vaguely noticed it. He just felt that, compared to the sword demon who stood in the position of usurper, the sword god beside Zhu Shiryao seemed to be too weak. From the beginning to the end, what exactly did the sword god do? It was nothing more than snatching big sister Zhu Shiryao as his follower and successor. After that, it was almost a failure. It was really difficult to connect him with the sword god who was unhindered in the 9 regions 10,000 years ago. On the contrary, sword demon really had the style of a peerless old devil. He hid behind the scenes, and with a few words, he provoked the people of the 4 sects to dance in his palm. He opened the gates one after another. First, he defeated the guardian who suppressed the sword demon, then he released a lot of negative emotions for his use before the trial of the 8 gates, and then he simply ran down to be his fighter. Finally, he defeated the combination of the sword god and Zhu Shiryao. During this period, every step seemed like a miracle, and the difficulty was far higher than that of the sword god. Compared to the legitimate successor, the realm of this usurper was higher. Moreover, when he thought about it carefully, the behavior of the sword god was quite difficult to justify. For example, why did he deliberately conceal the relationship between him and Big Sister? Even when they fought for the first time, Big Sister couldn't recognize him. In addition to the sword demon's demonic energy, could it be that the sword god also played a part in it? How did Big Sister's glasses break? After that, why did he suddenly choose to seize her body? Moreover, wasn't the act of seizing someone's body similar to that of a devil? Now, it seemed that sword demon gave an excellent answer. Sword demon tilted his head and looked at Wang Lu. You guessed right, the so-called sword god is just a usurper. Wang Lu sighed. This was completely different from what he said before. What I said earlier was not a lie. Sword Demon said, indeed, he is the one who inherited Zhong Shengming's lineage, while I am just a devil. After a pause, Sword Demon looked at Wang Lu with some rumination and said, but this doesn't change the fact that he is a usurper. So, can you guess the truth of the matter? Wang Lu thought for a moment and gave an answer. Did he usurp the throne 10,000 years ago? Very good. Sword Demon nodded, go on. Sword Demon's attitude proved Wang Lu's conjecture. However, this idea was somewhat unbelievable to Wang Lu, so he slowed down his speech. It's just like the change of a dynasty. The original emperor is overthrown, and the leader of the rebel army ascends the throne, worships the heavens and earth, and controls the dragon vein. To the common people, it's the same as the dynasty changing. But to the original emperor, rebellion is always rebellion. Then, you are the original emperor, and the sword god is the rebel who usurped the throne? At this point, it seemed that things had been straightened out, but Wang Lu felt that there were more things that didn't make sense. You were overthrown by that kind of trash. This doesn't make sense. Moreover, you were able to resist the 4 in 9 heavenly tribulations when you were alive. It's impossible for you to accomplish such a feat under the condition of a split personality. It can even be said that your primal chaos heaven-splitting sword chi is most particular about advancing courageously. You shouldn't have been eroded by the heart demon and become a split personality. This doesn't make sense. Seeing that Wang Lu's reasoning was difficult to continue, Sword Demon opened his mouth and said, the sword god's birth was an accident. Wait, the amount of information in this sentence is a bit too much. Sword Demon said again, it's not strange that you can't infer the truth, because your understanding of Zhong Shengming is wrong. Wrong information naturally can't infer the correct result. The sword god of Bai Li is a non-existent existence. If you carefully recall, you will find that I never took the initiative to mention this word. Non-existent. Where did this come from? Your understanding of the sword god of Bai Li Zhong Shengming comes from historical records. This is a matter of course. You are not someone who lived 10,000 years ago, so naturally you can only understand from books. But if you were lucky enough to be born 10,000 years ago, you should have heard of another name, the sword demon of Bai Li. The sword demon of Bai Li? Zhong Shengming was undefeated throughout his life. He was happy to repay kindness and enmity, but he never considered himself to be righteous. If he saw something pleasing to the eye, he would rob it, and if he saw something not pleasing to the eye, he would kill it. The immortal Tao that he cultivated could not even be restrained by the firmament of the 9 heavens, not to mention the ethics and morals of the world. A person who despises ethics and morals is naturally a demon. The sword demon of Bai Li is infamous. When Zhong Shengming was alive, who knows how many people would endlessly tremble because of his name. Wang Lu was simply flabbergasted. This was completely different from the record of the legend of Bai Li's ascension. It was even completely opposite. Although there would inevitably be omissions in the history books after tens of thousands of years, this kind of principled error was really rare. A peerless demon whose ominous name covered the entire 9 regions was actually not recorded in the history books. This, Zhong Shengming did whatever he wanted in his life, but his desires were almost all concentrated on the way of the sword. He did not have much interest in anything in the secular world, so whether it was good or evil, he did not do much. At least, he did not have the qualifications to stay in the history books. Wang Lu nodded, indicating that he understood. The legend of Bai Li's ascension recorded the deeds of many cultivators who had ascended, as well as those who were close to ascending, in the last 10,000 years. It was a thick book, and when it was spread over every cultivator's head, the space was actually very limited. Moreover, most of the ink and brushstrokes were spent on the cultivators' cultivation methods. As for their life deeds, naturally, only 1 or 2 were chosen to represent them. As for Zhong Xingming, in fact, there was almost no mention of his life deeds in the original text. Apart from spending a lot of space to describe the various kinds of inconceivable power of the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword, most of it was about Zhong Xingming's magnificent feat of creating a new world for the Baili region and piercing through the heavenly tribulation. As for his thousands of years of cultivation, regardless of whether it was good or evil, compared to the world-shaking battle during his lifetime, all of it was not worth mentioning. Wait, in other words, thinking of this, Wang Lu finally had an inspiration. Could it be that the so-called sword god of Baili is just a rumor? Sword Demon faintly smiled. Compared to the great merits of opening the path of ascension, everything in Zhong Xingming's life is insignificant. In terms of merits, it's not strange that there are more gods than devils. Wang Lu said, so that's how it is, but that's just a misunderstanding of the world. Zhong Xingming himself shouldn't be affected by external things. Regardless of whether the world has a good reputation or not, it has nothing to do with him. After all, he can't suddenly become a moral saint just because people say that he has great merits. Wouldn't he be condemned by thousands of people and die of no disease? The hearts of the people in the world have power. Perhaps the power of mortals in the world of mortals is still very weak, but it is different for cultivators who have embarked on the path of immortality. A tyrannical monarch can allow millions of people to curse him and still sit firmly on the throne, but no cultivator can withstand the unanimous rebuke of millions of cultivators. Similarly, when all the cultivators believe that a person who has blessed the people of Baili is the sword god, whether he is a god or a devil is no longer important. Sword Demon's smile was somewhat mocking. Zhong Xingming broke through the 4 in 9 heavenly tribulations, but he suffered a backlash from it. His primordial spirit collapsed, and his sword lost its sharpness. The power of hope of all living beings in the world contaminated his body, and he unexpectedly had no choice but to become a god. When Zhong Xingming chose to resist the heavenly tribulations, he disregarded life and death, but he didn't want to die in such an obscure way. Wang Lu nodded, expressing his deep understanding. At least when he died, his body was clean. But at that time, he was already seriously injured and on the verge of death, unable to cut off the power of hope. Instead, he was constantly eroded by the power of hope, and gradually, something that didn't belong to him appeared in his primordial spirit. At this point, the truth seemed to have been revealed. Wang Lu continued, so he scattered his primordial spirit and set up the method of dividing yin and yang by the sword. After 10,000 years, he experienced the transformation between life and death, filtered and purified his primordial spirit, and then reconstructed the body of God and devil, tracing back to the source. This reason seemed to be a lot smoother. Although Wang Lu still vaguely felt that there was an obstacle somewhere, the original mystery in his heart had been mostly solved. The only problem was, you can resurrect yourself, why do you need to involve outsiders? At least, there is no need for the sword god to bring in external help. After 10,000 years, he has already occupied the orthodox position, firmly suppressing you. Why do you need to bring in uncertain factors to find trouble for yourself? Sword Demon said, as early as 10,000 years ago, Zhong Xingming had already foreseen the possible changes that might happen. Before his death, his primordial spirit was eroded by more than half by the power of hope, and the position of host and guest had long since changed. If this development continues, 10,000 years later, of course, the sword god will be stronger. That's why there is a rule that the body of God and devil can't directly contact each other. Even if I want to kill the other, I have to rely on the hands of outsiders, because this is my only chance. I believe you have also seen that apart from the power of the primordial spirit, there is nothing special about the sword god. If I directly confront him, of course, I am not his opponent, but once more variables are introduced, his chances of winning will plummet. Wang Lu said, yes, I feel that every move of his is very clumsy. Because he is just a child. Sword Demon said coldly, before Zhong Xingming died, he was born after being contaminated by the power of hope. The time of his consciousness is less than a month, so naturally, he is clumsy. In other words, we are fighting to the death with a baby? Although he is a baby, after all, he has inherited Zhong Xingming's memory and more than half of his primordial spirit. Although he is clumsy when dealing with people, he is not an idiot. Given time, he will be even more difficult to deal with. If that's the case, then, can you answer me a question? Since he is not an idiot, how do you explain the possession of Zhu Shiyao? Even deliberately damaging her glasses and blinding her vision, what is the reason for this? Well, we finally got to the point. Sword Demon nodded, then stood up. Because possession is something that is bound to happen, and if we don't remove her glasses at the first moment, she will soon see through it, and then we can't use her as a chess piece to control. Then, I believe you have also guessed that it is not only the sword god who needs possession, I also need it. Now, after the battle between the gods and devils, my primordial spirit is almost complete, and the next step is to find a body that can bear the primordial spirit, and you are the target I have chosen. Wang Lu was silent for a while. Didn't you say that after the unity realm, the primordial spirit and the body can be mutually transformed? Is there no need for possession? Indeed, there is no need, but to not use the unprecedented void spirit root, and instead use the poor quality of the primordial spirit, isn't it a waste? As Sword Demon spoke, his whole body overflowed with devil chi, and his killing intent was no longer restrained. Sword Demon Zhong Xingming was a person who did whatever he wanted. If he saw something pleasing to the eye, he would rob it, and if he saw something unpleasant, he would kill it. Chapter 266. You are really a model of turning your back on others. Previously, you were gentle and amiable, just like a kind elder. You are stupid enough to regard me as an amiable elder. The battle between gods and demons has not been decided, and the primordial spirit has not been unified yet. Rashly possessing Zhu Shiyao is like breaking your wings. Sword God's mind is not clear, so he will possess Zhu Shiyao before his primordial spirit is not complete. He, a dignified Mahayana stage cultivator, was killed by you with 2 or 3 sword strikes. He asked for it. I will not be so stupid. In the face of Sword Demon's chill, on one hand, Wang Lu felt that his limbs and bones were being oppressed and frozen. On the other hand, he also smiled bitterly. As expected. Why didn't he possess Sword Demon earlier? Because there was not enough benefit from possessing Sword Demon earlier. Wasn't this reason simple? From the moment they met, he was vigilant against this Sword Demon. During this period, he almost couldn't restrain the impulse to directly draw his sword against him. He had long guessed that this Sword Demon was not a good person. In the end, there would inevitably be a scene where they would fall out, so he tried to catch him whenever he had the opportunity. Unfortunately, it still came to this. If possible, in fact, Wang Lu still preferred opponents like Sword God. Although he was strong, he was not smart. Only Zhu Shiyao, that fool, would be easily plotted against by him. But if it was Sword Demon, he would be completely helpless. This kind of all-round suppression made people feel suffocated and powerless. Wang Lu knew that this was not because he did not do well, but because the opponent was too strong. After all, human strength was limited. It was a fantasy for a Shudan stage cultivator to compete with a peak Mahayana stage cultivator. However, even if human strength was limited, a person's ambition was not limited. Even if he knew that there was only a slim chance of survival, he had to fight once first. When Zhong Xingming fought against the heavenly tribulation with Bai Li as the foundation, did he have a high degree of certainty? Wasn't he still holding the belief of dying to fight for a chance of survival? If he could do it, why couldn't he? Moreover, the Sword Demon had just completed the integration and recovery of his primordial spirit. It could be said that he was at his weakest. Although he was at the great vehicle stage and there was an insurmountable gap in terms of quality, in terms of strength, he was actually not much stronger than the sword god who had self-destructed. He could use the deity vanquishing sword and the god sealing seal to force the sword god into a desperate situation. Facing the sword demon, he should not be completely helpless. Thinking of this, Wang Lu felt that there was nothing more to say. Sword demon had been talking with him for so long. Obviously, he didn't expect Wang Lu to put down the sword of Mount Kun and resign himself to death. However, on account of the fact that the two of them had worked together before, he didn't want to die without knowing why. Although the sword demon acted as he pleased, he wasn't a despicable person. Of course, the sword demon's personality wasn't something he needed to worry about. Whether he was despicable or just, since it was clear that he wanted Wang Lu's life, Wang Lu could only fight first. Looking at Wang Lu's firm eyes under the heavy pressure, the sword demon nodded approvingly. Well, you don't lose your fighting spirit even in the face of a desperate situation. You are indeed worthy to be the top talent in 9 regions. I seem to see in you a powerful destiny that will lead the continent in the future. After a pause, the sword demon said, and in my hands, everything about you will play a greater role. Use it to f*ck your mother. Wang Lu let out a shout and decided to strike preemptively. His original magical ability was suddenly launched. Thousands of broken swords appeared around the two people in a flash. The endless sea of bitterness was replaced by the bloody sky and earth. It was Wang Lu's unique 100 zhang world. Well, your talent is really amazing. How long has it been since the last time? This original magical ability has been perfected. The sword demon expressionlessly looked at the world of his original magical ability, which was more powerful than before, and indifferently expressed his approval. However, it was obvious that he didn't put Wang Lu's unique skill in his eyes. For a Mahayana stage supreme, everything about a Shudan stage cultivator was just a trivial trick, which he simply didn't put in his eyes. Unfortunately, your original magical ability evolved from my primal chaos heaven-splitting sword. Don't you think that you are displaying your slight skill in front of an expert and making a fool of yourself by displaying it in front of me, its original master? While speaking, the sword demon sneered. At the same time, Wang Lu felt his primordial spirit, jade mansion, and body simultaneously shook. The world around him was like broken glass, shattering into thousands of fragments. The bloody sky and the thousands of broken swords vanished in a puff of smoke under the sword demon's laughter. And when his original magical ability was broken, Wang Lu felt dizzy, his chest felt stuffy, and blood flowed out of his 7 orifices. I know everything about the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword like the back of my hand. The more thought and energy you spend on it, the smaller the odds are. Even if you are a legendary genius from the immortal world, it is impossible for you to have a deeper attainment in the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword than me in such a short period of time. Wang Lu, of course, knew all of this. From the beginning, he didn't feel at ease to accept the sword demon's inheritance. Although his original magical ability greatly borrowed the essence of the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword, the framework was still the framework of the non-phase method. It was just that he didn't expect it to be used by the sword demon. If he was a Mahayana stage supreme at his peak, as long as his primordial spirit slightly revolved, he could crush a small Shudan stage cultivator into powder. Currently, the sword demon hadn't recovered much of his power, but based on skill alone, he could easily suppress Wang Lu. In fact, the moment his original magical ability was broken, Wang Lu couldn't even distinguish whether the other party used force to break skill or skill to break skill. Again. The defeat didn't make Wang Lu discouraged. On the contrary, it made Wang Lu's fighting spirit firmer. Since he couldn't use the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword, he would use the same old trick. He could still fight with the non-phase sword. In fact, the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword was indeed good, but in essence, Wang Lu still felt that the non-phase sword was much more convenient to use. Perhaps the old saying was true, the wife of a bad husband doesn't leave the hall. Compared to the sharp and heaven-defying Baili divine sword, in the end, the non-phase sword could still be used. Moreover, the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword was both a weakness and a breakthrough point that could be exploited. As long as he analyzed it and used the non-phase sword to target it, Wang Lu believed that his sword defense would not be so easily broken. The non-phase sword is indeed brilliant, but it's a pity. The sword demon lightly said. He raised his hand and flipped his wrist. Wang Lu suddenly felt as if there was a mountain pressing down on his body. His limbs and bones couldn't exert any strength. His body suddenly fell down, unable to use any sword defense. Unfortunately, your body has long been infected by the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword qi, so you can't control yourself. Wang Lu tried his best to rotate his primordial spirit, trying to regain control of his body. However, he found out that the outside of his Zifu gradually fell into darkness. The non-phase sword bone and his jade mansion were shrouded in darkness. The reason why I passed the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword qi to you is to break the defense of your non-phase sword bone. Once the hole is broken, no matter how great your ability is, you can't use it. He. Even though his body was gradually out of control, Wang Lu still didn't give up. The void core in his jade mansion crazily rotated, responding to the roar of the primordial spirit in his Zifu. However, the darkness still couldn't be stopped, bit by bit. Only the jade mansion still maintained its brightness. Wang Lu even saw that the sword demon's devil mansion had already been built outside his jade mansion. Relying on his remaining strength, Wang Lu still didn't give up the conversation, because the other party was willing to waste his breath to talk to him, which meant that there was an opportunity. You've really been planning for a long time. From the beginning, you've been laying out everything, plotting to seize my young and beautiful body? Sword Demon said, yes, the unprecedented void spirit root has appeared before my eyes, so I naturally won't let it go. However, there is a key obstacle to successfully seize your body. Non-phase method? Humph, I don't know who your master is, but although your attainment in non-phase golden body is shallow, it vaguely contains the supreme great way, and is already in the realm of leakless golden body. It's difficult for me to forcibly seize your body in my remnant soul state, so I had to use the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword as bait to lure you into self-destructing. Fortunately, you're really obedient. While speaking, Sword Demon sighed. I thought that after the Dharma-ending tribulation, it would be difficult for the cultivators of 9 regions to have the opportunity to gain insight into the Great Way. Unexpectedly, this piece of land still breeds amazing geniuses. Although this non-phase method has an enormous side effect, it's a unity of its own, closely linked to the Supreme Great Way. It's in no way inferior to any immortal level method. If it's not the immortal world's method, and purely by one's own comprehension, it's really hard to imagine that there's actually such a talented person. Wang Lu was shocked. Even his struggling primordial spirit froze for a moment. However, what I said before is not to deceive you. Although non-phase method is strong, it's not suitable for you. Your master created this method under extremely bad circumstances. TSK, I'm afraid the 9 underworld's remnant people are not that bleak to actually create such a method. This method is not suitable for you, and the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword qi is indeed more suitable for you. Unfortunately, fortune and misfortune come hand in hand. You're doomed to encounter this calamity. As Sword Demon's voice continued to sink, Wang Lu only felt that the darkness inside his body has completely spread. One after another, dark totems towered on the ground, and monstrous demonic fire rose. This originally familiar body has begun to be quickly branded with Sword Demon's mark. Wang Lu tried his best to maintain the light in his jade mansion, but the black mist still continued to penetrate. Give up. I'm telling you so much not to give you a chance to make a comeback, but to reward you for helping me get rid of the Sword God, so that you can die with understanding. Pointless struggle can't show your bravery, it will only add to your troubles. Just as Sword Demon faintly spoke, a light suddenly lit up in the darkness. Devil, don't even think about succeeding. A clear rebuke, like lightning, cut through the darkness. Among the tens of thousands of demonic flame totems, a woman in white appeared like a fairy. Behind her, the sky was filled with sword light, like a bright galaxy. Master. While Wang Lu was stunned, a fire suddenly ignited in his heart. Although the opponent he faced was a complete Mahayana stage primordial spirit, if it was his master. However, upon closer inspection, he could not help but be stunned. The woman in white was not the fifth elder of Spirit Sword Mountain, but the spirit of the sword of Mount Kun, Autumn Beam. God knows why the reticent sword spirit would appear in his body and resolutely attack Sword Demon. However, Wang Lu was very clear that Autumn Beam was not Sword Demon's opponent. She was clearly committing suicide. Regarding this sudden appearance of the sword spirit, Sword Demon was extremely surprised. How could there be such a loyal sword spirit? Little girl, you've been cultivating for more than 1,000 years, and you've followed more than 1 or 2 masters, yet you actually have a heart of blind loyalty? Autumn Beam coldly replied, it's true that I've been cultivating for more than 1,000 years, but I've never abandoned my master and fled. It's not easy for you to cultivate, and your sword heart is about to be formed, so why destroy your own future? Never mind, after I take over your body, this spiritual sword of yours will eventually be in my hands. While speaking, the black demonic flame spread like a prairie fire, and then gathered together, like a black dragon rushing toward Autumn Beam. Autumn Beam used her own cultivation to urge the sword light to resist the black dragon, not retreating even half a step. The sword spirit of Mount Kun's 1,000 years of cultivation shone brilliantly. Sword Demon slightly frowned and began to mobilize more forces to besiege Autumn Beam. However, Autumn Beam's snow-white dress was like an inextinguishable star in mid-air. Her sword light never stopped. Even though the besieging force was far superior to her, her sword light was getting sharper and sharper. And on the woman's forehead, a spirit eye vaguely opened. Humph, using battle to nurture battle, catalyze sword heart? Reckless girl, with just a mere 1,000 years of cultivation, I can easily destroy you. In a split second, the group of demons danced around, and the light of sword spirit Autumn Beam was instantly engulfed by the black demonic flame. It was indeed easy for Sword Demon to destroy Autumn Beam. If he didn't have some appreciation for this foolishly loyal woman, he would have already turned her into a puff of smoke. However, seeing that Autumn Beam was about to catalyze her sword heart in actual combat, he had no choice but to be ruthless. After suppressing Autumn Beam, the next one would naturally be Wang Lu. The cat and mouse game had been long enough, so it was time to end it all. Thinking of this, Sword Demon suddenly felt somewhat dispirited. And just at this time, a strange light lit up from the middle of the dark cloud world. It was Wang Lu's Jade Mansion. Chapter 267. Autumn Beam, well done. In the pitch-black world, Wang Lu's ice-cold voice reverberated. The next moment, the whole pitch-black world, as if it had been hit by a glass, loudly shattered. However, before the fragments completely fell apart, the black fire that filled the sky suddenly solidified, as if it was glued together with the countless fragments, so that they wouldn't completely disintegrate. Sword Demon's primordial spirit instantly swelled 10,000 times, like a giant that blotted out the sky and occupied the entire world. Although he had just recovered, the primordial spirit of a Mahayana stage cultivator still had an inconceivable magical ability. This world was almost shattered into billions of pieces, but it was completely solidified by him in an instant. However, in this pitch-black world, there was an unstoppable part that gradually drifted away. It was the remaining light in the middle of the world, the core of Wang Lu's jade mansion. Sword Demon stood in the darkness, incomprehensibly looking at Wang Lu's primordial spirit form in the jade mansion. Wang Lu's eyes were as indifferent as ice. You want it? Then I'll give it to you. Sword Demon was silent for a moment, and then his eyes suddenly sharpened. Thousands of black dragons roared from the broken world and rushed toward Wang Lu's jade mansion, trying to pollute the last inch of light. Boom! With a soul-stirring sound, the black fire dragons collapsed one after another in front of the jade mansion. The last barrier of light was unexpectedly indestructible. Is this your trump card? Sword Demon asked. Wang Lu said, there's one thing you're right about, Master is indeed a great person, so, perhaps she really has an excellent perception in the creation of the method, or perhaps she has experienced too much, so she has foresight on everything. That's why when she first taught me how to cultivate the non-phase method, she exhorted me to do it. I can change the method, I can abandon the non-phase method like a worn-out shoe, but the core part must not be lost, no matter what happens. As he spoke, Wang Lu smiled. Therefore, when I was cultivating the primal chaos heaven-splitting divine sword, all the other places came into contact with the sword chi. Only this place operated independently and protected my last bit of light. Sword Demon said with a sinking voice, you actually have this level of caution, which is indeed beyond my expectation. This non-phase method's lowest level operation method also has the ability to deceive the heavens and cross the sea, unexpectedly making me misjudge you. However, even if you can protect the last inch of light, so what? Wang Lu thought for a moment. You can possess my body, but you can't taint my soul? What a joke. Sword Demon said indifferently. Then, he continued to urge the devil flame to stick the fragments of the world. He was trying to carefully reassemble these fragments. Then, his voice was still flat. Outside this jade mansion is all of your 10 years of cultivation. Your magical power, your non-phase golden body, and even everything about you are entrusted here. Wang Lu smiled. It's yours. You're welcome. Sword Demon remained silent. Send him off. It was easy to say. Without the last inch of light in his core, everything else was just a dead thing. What was the difference between a living person and a piece of flesh? It was the only jade mansion occupied by Wang Lu. But what Sword Demon needed was a fresh body, a peerless top spirit root, not a pile of useless pieces of flesh. Not to mention, at this time, his primordial spirit had already entered the jade mansion, and he already had a close connection with this world. If the world collapsed, his end would not be good. However, for Wang Lu, merely occupying the jade mansion and abandoning everything else meant that Wang Lu, at most, could only keep his life. His 10 years of cultivation would all go down the drain. From now on, he would just be an ordinary person who had never cultivated. How could it be that miserable? Primordial spirit is still there, jade mansion is still there, non-phase immortal heart is still there. At least, these experiences and memories are still there. Even if my cultivation is gone, at worst, I'll just spend another 10 years to get it back. 10 years is just 10 years, is that a long time? Deceiving yourself and others, immortal cultivators move forward with indomitable will, there's no chance to start over. If you destroy your own cultivation, I'm afraid you won't even be able to keep your spirit root. It's even more impossible for the heaven and earth's providence to condense in the body of a loser. So what? It's still better than being possessed. Don't you understand this truth? The truth was indeed simple, but if one could make a choice by understanding the truth, then there wouldn't be so many heart-wrenching foolish actions in this world. Knowing full well that corruption would lead to the destruction of the country, but still unable to control their own hands. Knowing full well that taking poison would ruin their whole life, but still unable to suppress the fire of desire in their hearts. Knowing full well. Too many knowingly violating the law made the truth, after all, only the truth. Indeed, abandoning one's cultivation was better than being possessed. However, if one really had to personally bury 10 years of cultivation, who would be able to make a decision without hesitation? Sword Demon was somewhat helpless. If he had known this earlier, he wouldn't have diverted too much of his power to suppress Autumn Beam. He should have left some to guard against Wang Lu. If he could have maintained a high pressure, he might not have had the opportunity to achieve this step. However, just now, Autumn Beam didn't hesitate to perish together with him. If there was a slight mistake, perhaps she would have succeeded in making a comeback. As for Wang Lu, if he wanted to court his own death, then that was up to him. Although it was a pity that he destroyed the Void Spirit Root, not far from him, there was a Sword Spirit Root, which was not necessarily inferior to it. Although Sword Demon was not willing to possess a female cultivator, since he had no other choice, then. With that in mind, Sword Demon was ready to withdraw. However, just as he moved, he suddenly saw an orange jade stele erected at the edge of this dark world. Sword Demon was inwardly shocked. This world had obviously fallen into his control. Only the core was protected by the non-phase method, and the rest of the world was under his control. However, this jade stele silently appeared at the edge of this dark world. Unexpectedly, he didn't even notice it. Moreover, the place where the jade stele stood had dissipated the devil chi, making it impossible for him to approach it. Once he probed it with his primordial spirit, he felt a tearing pain. What exactly was the origin of this jade stele? While thinking, Sword Demon tried to bypass this unknown jade stele. This world was about to collapse, so there was no need to share life and death with this reckless kid. However, when he approached the edge, an orange-red whip swept over. It was so fast that he couldn't react. Half of Sword Demon's body was swept by it, and in an instant, like melting snow, half of his body melted. What the hell is this? Sword Demon was really taken aback. Although his current state was weak, his primordial spirit was, after all, still a peak Mahayana stage cultivator. How could it not withstand a light sweep of the orange whip? Moreover, this orange jade stele had sealed the entire space, so Sword Demon couldn't find a way out. After all, Wang Lu was the lead disciple of one of the 5 uniques, so it was impossible for him to only have one spirit sword heavenly talisman as a life-saving prop. It was just that, he really didn't expect that he would actually use this precious prop at this time. Previously, there were so many crises, yet he didn't use this card, he was really patient. But then again, if he didn't hide it deep enough, how could he have fallen into this trap? This orange jade stele had the ability to isolate the 2 worlds, so it was reasonable to use it to protect oneself rather than trap the enemy. However, if Wang Lu used this jade stele ahead of time, it would be a waste of a treasure. Because it was impossible for Sword Demon to fight him head-on, he would certainly wait for the effect of the prop to disappear, and then reappear. Moreover, this deep layer of the sword tomb sealed everything. Even if Wang Lu could keep himself safe for a while, as long as he couldn't escape, he would eventually fall into Sword Demon's hands. This fellow, he had planned this from the very beginning? No, it was obviously impossible. Although Wang Lu was smart, he couldn't predict the future. It could only be said that he was indeed a natural attacker. A defensive and life-saving prop made him use it to perish together. Thinking of this, Sword Demon calmed down and said to Wang Lu, "I can spare your life, but you don't have to do this." Instead, Wang Lu laughed. "Zhong Shengming, this is not like you. You've never been defeated in your life. When have you ever been soft? When have you ever been afraid of death? You're not even afraid of the 4-in-9 heavenly tribulation, so why would you be afraid of my heaven and earth disobedience? If you keep talking, I'll look down on you." Amidst the laughter, the pitch-black world further disintegrated, and Sword Demon unexpectedly couldn't hold it back. "I'll ask you one last time, do you want to live or die? Of course, I want to die. Facing the almost crazy Wang Lu, Sword Demon finally became completely silent. At this time, words were already meaningless. He quietly looked at Wang Lu in the light with a smile on his face, but his eyes were incomparably calm. Although his laughter was slightly crazy, his face didn't have the slightest trace of fear or nervousness that a dying person should have. He appeared incomparably calm. This kid really gave him a surprise at the last moment. He had kept the core of the cultivation technique and cultivated the primal chaos heaven-splitting divine sword under the guise of crossing the sea, as well as this orange jade tablet that could determine the heaven and earth in one fell swoop. In this game of mutual deception, he had actually managed to turn the tables at the last moment. This situation was completely out of his expectations. It was beyond the calculation of a Mahayana stage cultivator. After being stunned for a long time, Sword Demon helplessly shook his head. You passed this round. Although I still don't like you, in the end, you have to accept your defeat. After a pause, Sword Demon's expression sank. Enough. As Sword Demon spoke, the clouds in the pitch-black world suddenly broke through the sky, and the black flames that shrouded the vault of heaven melted like snow, revealing a clear sky. On the ground, tens of thousands of dense demon totems silently sank, deeply dormant. Enough. Sword Demon repeated, this is the end. This is the end. Wang Lu simply didn't pay attention to him. Since he had already made a decision, he certainly wouldn't let his previous efforts go to waste because of someone else's words, or because of some external changes. Fighting against this kind of ancient devil, even if he saw him turn into ashes with his own eyes, it wouldn't be safe. Therefore, he had to use all the means he could, there was no mistake. Ha ha ha. Seeing that Wang Lu stubbornly wanted to die together with him, Sword Demon happily laughed. You, this kid, when I want to kill you, you don't want to die. When I don't want to kill you, you actually want to die. Humph, I really want to fulfill your wish. Unfortunately, the rules don't say that. With that, his smile vanished, and the whole world suddenly froze, as if time had stopped. Hundreds of millions of fragments were forcibly glued together and reconnected with Wang Lu's jade mansion. No matter how hard the latter tried, he couldn't cut it. At the same time, the orange monolith on the border was also pressed down by an inexplicable invisible force. With a trace of trembling moan, it slowly fell below the horizon. I'll say it again. Enough. Sword Demon coldly said, and inside his jade mansion, Wang Lu also paused his action. All the means had been used, even his last card, the Lady Boss's Jade Card of Love, was taken out by him, but it seemed like it was still a bit lacking. The opponent was too strong. Peak Mahayana stage, resisting the 4 in 9 divine tribulations. Perhaps even the original body of the nine-tailed fox that wreaked havoc in the Blue River region might not be able to contend against Zhong Shengming. Although Sword Demon was only a wisp of his primordial spirit, the Lady Boss only gave him a piece of jade card. And at this time, Sword Demon said, don't be depressed, this is your win. Right now, it's the interference of the will of the higher-ups, it has nothing to do with me. Wang Lu was a bit surprised and puzzled. The will of the higher-ups? Sword Demon coldly snorted. You haven't realized it yet, you and I are just insignificant chess pieces in this sword tomb. Chapter 268. The Will of the Upper Echelons? When Sword Demon said this word, Wang Lu became silent. It was an unexpected explanation. Sword Demon's words couldn't be completely trusted, but since things had come to this point, there was no better choice but to listen carefully. Thus, Wang Lu gradually extinguished his fighting spirit and quietly accepted the world's recovery. The clouds in front of him broke through the sky, revealing a bright light. The traces left by Sword Demon had all disappeared. As for whether it was a temporary hibernation or a permanent disappearance, it was unknown for the time being. In a valley, Sword Spirit Autumn Beam was quietly lying on a clear lake. It seemed that she had overexerted herself and hadn't suffered any serious injuries. Wang Lu inwardly heaved a sigh of relief. The feeling of escaping from death was not as good as he imagined it to be. The ups and downs did not all bring pleasure. Although this time, he managed to pull back a bit, but compared to his counterattack, he still preferred to crush his opponent. Putting down the waves in his heart, Wang Lu decided to listen to Sword Demon's explanation. Where should I start? After a moment of silence, Sword Demon shook his head in a self-deprecating manner. Because I really didn't expect you to pass. I didn't even prepare an explanation, so I'll just say whatever comes to my mind. With that, Sword Demon restrained his expression and said in a deep voice, in fact, you raised an excellent question before, but unfortunately, you were interrupted by Sword God before you could go any deeper. At that time, you asked me why I went through so much trouble to come back from death. In fact, when I used Bai Li's Earth Line to fight the 4-in-9 Heavenly Tribulation, I already had the will to die. At that time, I spent no less than 20 years preparing for it. When I raised my sword to fight the Heavenly Tribulation, I even felt that if I didn't die in that battle, I would have wasted the 20 years of hard work. Coming back from death was originally not part of my plan. Wang Lu said, didn't you say that you died with remaining grievances because you were tainted by the world's wish power? The Sword Demon said, that's right. Being contaminated by the world's power of will before my death was completely out of my expectation. But because it was out of my expectation, I made all kinds of preparations in the past 20 years, but I never made any arrangements for this. At that time, I was simply helpless. In fact, this principle isn't difficult to see through. In this sword tomb, the swords are divided into yin and yang, and there's also the creation of life and death. How could it be arranged by someone who's about to die? Hearing this, Wang Lu finally understood. So you asked someone else for help? With your temperament, you fought alone against the Heavenly Tribulation, but now you're willing to lower your head to others when death is at hand? Zhong Xingming coldly said, what a joke. When have I, Zhong Xingming, ever lowered my head to anyone? They were the ones who approached me and offered me a deal. Oh. Someone who has the qualifications to make a deal with you and raise conditions must not be an ordinary person, right? If it's a bunch of incompetent people trying to take advantage of the situation, I'll be able to destroy their souls even if I'm severely injured and on the verge of death. In fact, it was a group of Dixian that proposed a deal with me. Dixian? What's that? Sword Demon sneered and said, they're just a bunch of arrogant people who don't know how to appreciate favors. You'll know the specifics later. I'll continue first. At that time, they found me and promised to help me solve the problem of the vow erosion, and in return, I had to do them a favor. Guarding the tomb? More or less. They wanted me to choose a successor for them. Successor? Inherit what? What conditions do I need to meet? Sword Demon said, I don't remember the specific conditions. In fact, they didn't say it in detail. After all, as a gatekeeper, I have to experience a transformation between life and death. My primordial spirit will gather and disperse once, and my memory will inevitably be lost. Therefore, only one basic condition was established at that time. If I can choose this person, I can obtain complete freedom. Speaking up to this point, Sword Demon further explained, in order to prevent me from keeping my promise, this sword tomb was built with restrictions. Before finding a suitable successor, this layer is absolutely sealed, and one can only enter but not leave. Wang Lu nodded. And then? And then? Sword Demon sneered. And then everything became a mess. According to their plan, should have resuscitation in a few decades, or at most a few hundred years. And there were enough materials left in the sword tomb for me to destroy the sword god and reunite my primordial spirit. After that, as long as I try my best to find a successor who satisfies the conditions, everyone will be happy. But in fact, my resuscitation will be 10,000 years later, and the materials for me to use will vanish into thin air. If not for you uninvited guests, hee. Wang Lu asked, since the value of our existence is so high, what about the possession thing? Sword Demon said, isn't this a matter of course? When you resuscitation, you find that everything in the original plan has become a mess. Can you expect that the next step will be the same as before? I found a successor for him, but what if the sword tomb still doesn't let him go? So, instead of pinning my hopes on the incompetent arrangement of a group of incompetent Dixian, it's better for me to do it myself. But it's not easy to break through the restriction of the Dixian level in the primordial spirit state. Wang Lu was silent for a while. And senior sister and I just happened to provide you with an opportunity. Yes, although my cultivation is still shallow, I have the void spirit root and the sword spirit root. Both of them are top-notch aptitudes. Even if this world is isolated from the great Tao, my primordial spirit has long carried my own Tao. Once I integrate your bodies, I will be able to break out in less than 3 years. Although the Dixian's realm is high, I don't care about it. Wang Lu asked, what about now? Now? Sword Demon smiled. Isn't the situation very obvious? You're lucky to meet the conditions to become a successor. And according to the restriction of this place, I can't make a move on a qualified successor. So consider yourself lucky. Wang Lu asked, what are the qualifications for a qualified successor? It's very simple, as long as I find him pleasing to the eye. Sword Demon said indifferently. Wang Lu was silent for a long time. He couldn't find anything to complain about, because there were too many things to complain about. First of all, as long as he was pleasing to the eye. What kind of standard was that? Was the group of Dixian that had signed a contract with him crazy? Secondly, if I'm pleasing to the eye, then I'm qualified. In other words, for a long time, you've been displeased with me? To think that you would pretend to be a hero of the valley and pass on your skills to me. Of course, now it seems that you didn't have good intentions when you taught me the sky-splitting divine sword. And most importantly, now that I've suddenly passed, does that mean that you've suddenly found me pleasing to the eye? In other words, you were forced into the path of mutual destruction by me. TSK, can a test of life and death so easily shake a person's sense of beauty? Aren't they a little too afraid of death? Now that I'm qualified, it means that you find me pleasing to the eye. But you're sneering one moment and shaking your head the next. It looks like you're absolutely irreconcilable with me. How is that pleasing to the eye? Or could it be that the nature of Baili Sword Demon is at Sundra? Seeing Wang Lu's silence, Sword Demon also guessed what he was thinking. For me, your void spirit root, your non-phase method, and your crooked ideas are certainly interesting, but that's all. I've been cultivating for thousands of years, and I've seen too many things. Speaking to this, Sword Demon paused. However, the number of people who can force me into a dead end can be counted on one's fingers. I, Zhong Shengming, have always been unrestrained, but I have my respect for the strong. Since you can do this, you can barely enter my eyes. Whether I'm willing or not, rules are rules. They're not rules set by others, but the rules that I've abided by for thousands of years. As for fear of death? Sword Demon smiled and didn't try to argue further. Let's get back to the point. Since you've become the successor, you have the right to know the truth about this sword tomb. That is, the thing that you're going to inherit. Wang Lu nodded. His heart was filled with expectation. According to the Sword Devil, the people who came to him before he died were a group of Earth Immortals. Although he had never heard of the word Earth Immortal, he could understand it from the literal meaning. Since they had the word immortal in their name, they should not be weak trash. They were probably below the true immortal realm and above the mortal world. Not to mention that Sword Demon also admitted that they were a group of strong people that he had to take seriously. Moreover, they were able to set up the yin and yang division and other formidable array and restriction, so their strength was beyond doubt. And how precious would the thing left behind by such a group of people be? After all, even Zhong Xingming was just the gatekeeper of the inheritance. I haven't seen the specific content of the inheritance, but look at this, and you'll understand everything. But before that, I have to confirm it with you. Sword Demon's expression was unusually serious. His awe-inspiring eyes even made Wang Lu suspect that at any time, he would turn against him and kill him. Of course, Sword Demon didn't do that. Instead, he asked a simple question: "Are you sure you want to know all this? You still have the chance to give up now. I won't suddenly dislike you because of this." While Wang Lu was muttering to himself, Sword Demon said, "With your ability, you should be able to see the problem here. What are the Dixian? Since they have the ability to make me approve of them, why don't you know of their existence? And the rich inheritance they left behind, was it really just for the sake of nurturing their descendants?" Then, Sword Demon muttered to himself for a moment and added, "There are some things I can't say directly, but I hope you can seriously think about it. For example, this question: in the past, Baili Province's devil wreaked havoc and stole from the horizon. Because of this, he was suppressed by the vault of heaven, and the path of cultivators to ascend to immortality was almost cut off. People say that the might of heaven cannot be violated, but how can there be such a vengeful heaven in this world?" "You mean?" Wang Lu was inwardly startled. However, before he could ask the question, Sword Demon had already bypassed this topic. "So, are you sure you want to know all this?" Wang Lu didn't hesitate at all. "Of course." "Good." Sword Demon smiled again. It was hard to tell whether his smile was gratified or sarcastic. He waved his hand and summoned a ray of light to project it into Wang Lu's world. It was a map, and it was a very well-made three-dimensional map. It looked like an underground building divided into many layers. If he wasn't mistaken, it should be this ancient sword tomb. "This is the sword tomb we are in." Sword Demon confirmed Wang Lu's guess, and then he waved his hand again. The next moment, 100 times more rays of light bloomed, and a net appeared in front of Wang Lu's eyes. A grand and spectacular net almost blotted out the sky and the earth, covering his field of vision. And the three-dimensional map of the sword tomb he saw just now just happened to step on a node of the network. And the nodes that were similar to the sword tomb were as numerous as the stars in the sky, innumerable. "These are the inheritances you've inherited," Sword Demon lightly said, and at the same time, he looked at Wang Lu's reaction with interest. "Of course, the premise is that you can find the key to open the door." Chapter 269. The ancient sword tomb, which was regarded as a treasure by the 5 eunuchs of the Wuxia League, was just an insignificant point in the huge network, while on the network, there were tens of thousands of nodes as dazzling as the stars. Is this the legacy of Dixian? For a time, Wang Lu fell into a great shock. In the face of this bright three-dimensional map of the galaxy, his own insignificance was particularly highlighted. Along the way, he had broken through several obstacles and experienced numerous difficulties and dangers, but it turned out that this was just a point in this huge star map, and there were countless similar tombs. Then, perhaps for this world, my existence is also insignificant? It seems that I stand at the cusp of the storm, the lead disciple of the 5 eunuchs of the Wuxia League, the top elite of the younger generation. Perhaps in a vast unknown world, there are countless existences like me. My existence has no effect on this world, I'm just a dust-like mortal. Of course, no one was willing to live such a mediocre life. In addition to dedicating their limited life to the infinite ascension of millions of people, the only thing they could do now was probably to strive to find the truly extraordinary existence in this world, to prove that this world still has some cool points to speak of. For example, after returning to the Spirit Sword Mountain, through the sect's channel, he would advertise to the world, "If you have time traveler, reborn, or carry an old grandpa, come and find me." Then he would change his hairstyle every day, looking forward to Lu Li, who sat behind him in the 10-Cloud Hall class, to strike up a conversation with him and so on. No, the role seems to be wrong. In short, it took Wang Lu some time to calm down the shock in his heart. Despite his 10 years of immortal cultivation and having seen a lot of things, what he saw now had really exceeded the bottom line of his tolerance. Is this the real unfolding of God? However, although he was surprised, Wang Lu quickly recovered his professional thinking ability. Although he was shocked, since the matter was presented in front of him, the next thing to do was to analyze the principle behind it. Ruling out the possibility of Zhong Xingming talking nonsense, he decided to accept his statement for the time being. Then, what was the origin of the group of Dixian people that Zhong Xingming jokingly called as ignorant people? If each of the tens of millions of nodes on the network was of the same scale as the ancient sword tomb, then it was hard to imagine that such a terrifying group of tombs was the work of the mortal world. In terms of resources alone, in this ancient sword tomb, there were already several spirit treasures that had been excavated. Rumor has it that there were even more immortal treasures in the depths of this place. Then, wouldn't tens of thousands of nodes mean that there were tens of thousands of immortal treasures? Even the most affluent sect in the Wanxian League, Xingjing sect, could not find 100 immortal treasures even if they searched the entire sect. This was because Xingjing sect people had developed a large number of ancient heritage, and among these heritage that could really be used, less than 1/3 were only for exhibition. However, even if he didn't take the people of today as an example, even in the Dreamtime when the immortal Tao was flourishing, there wasn't a single clan that could collect tens of thousands of immortal treasures. According to the records in the Stellar Sword scripture, the Stellar sect at its most arrogant time only possessed 100 to 200 immortal treasures. Amongst them, there were even fewer that could be considered to be counted, and most of them only had the name of immortal treasure in name. Tens of thousands of immortal treasures was not something that the 9 regions could bear. Could it be that Dixian was a true immortal from the lower realm? If he was not a true immortal, how could he have such a large scale of resources? Scared? Seeing Wang Lu was silent for a long time, how could Sword Demon not guess what he was thinking? When they first found me and showed me these things, I was just as shocked. However, when you understand the principle, you probably have a different idea. After Sword Demon finished speaking, he took some time to organize his words, and then said, "Strictly speaking, these tens of millions of Earth Immortals' legacies don't really exist. This map only shows a possibility of their existence." Possibility? Sword Demon said, "No one, even if it's a true immortal, could possibly have such a huge amount of resources. Even if all the resources in the 9 regions are plucked, it's still impossible to forge tens of thousands of immortal treasures. Just the essence of metal and wood is enough to dry up the feng shui line in the 9 regions, not to mention the other resources needed to forge tens of thousands of immortal treasures. To put it simply, the material is limited." This truth was very easy to understand. The 9 regions was only so big, and there were only so many things, which were clearly laid out in front of them. Of course, it was impossible for them to be inexhaustible. But in this world, there are still things that are inexhaustible. Sword Demon said and then looked at Wang Lu as if he was considering, waiting for his answer. "Is it the Great Tao?" "Yes." Sword Demon nodded his head. "Between heaven and earth, only this elusive Great Tao is inexhaustible, and can be taken by people. When you achieve the King Pill and initially condense the Great Tao, the magical power in your Jade Mansion can be endless, and you don't need to absorb it from the outside world." When you reach the Yuanying stage, you have the power of creation, and the key to this is the Great Tao. When you comprehend the Great Tao and conform to it, you have the ability to create something out of nothing. Wang Lu asked, but even if it conformed to the Great Tao, it's impossible to create tens of thousands of immortal treasures out of nothing. Yes, no one can create tens of thousands of immortal treasures out of nothing, because human strength is limited. The Great Tao is endless, and human strength is limited. But what if the Great Tao itself transforms into immortal treasures? Wang Lu asked, the Great Tao is heartless and treats all living things as straw dogs, so how could it be so considerate to create immortal treasures for cultivators? The Great Tao doesn't belong to my family. Isn't it said that the Great Tao rewards the diligent? What kind of explanation is this? This is not an explanation, but rather a supreme Great Tao that many people are unable to deeply understand. Sword Demon faintly smiled. In fact, if the efforts of cultivators are taken into account, it's not difficult to find that nothing in this world is really created out of nothing. In order to obtain an endless supply of magical power, cultivators have to go through a long period of bitter cultivation. The Great Tao rewards the diligent. Looking at it from another perspective, even if something is created out of nothing, it's just a way for the Great Tao to reward cultivators. Wang Lu nodded. As long as one works hard, there will be a reward? As long as one works hard, there will be a reward, of course, that's impossible. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many mediocre and incompetent people in this world. The Great Tao of heaven and earth is both generous and callous. For some people, it's cruel and merciless, but for others, it's generous to the point of creating something out of nothing. And this myriad graveyard is the latter. When Wang Lu heard this, he couldn't help but frown. Don't you think it's long-winded? Simply put, this myriad graveyard is a feedback mechanism created by the Dixian's great divine ability. Those immortal treasures don't already exist, but according to the program designed by the Dixians, one can obtain the immortal treasures that the Great Tao of heaven and earth gives back. After a pause, Wang Lu said, it's like teaching people to fish. Sword Demon sighed, sure enough, you have a good perception. You're right, that's the case. In fact, these myriad graveyard doesn't even have a physical existence. It's just a feedback mechanism designed by the Dixians in combination with the Great Tao of heaven and earth. When the conditions are met, the entrance to the myriad graveyard will be opened. Then, as the cultivator enters, the myriad graveyard will continuously improve its internal design. The overall idea is similar to the current sword tomb. The cultivator needs to pass through layers upon layers of tests and difficulties, and finally, the reward is based on the cultivator's efforts. Of course, this reward isn't fixed, but there's a general range. It's impossible to go through untold hardships to reach the deepest part, only to find a magical tool there. Wang Lu concluded, well, it's a random instance. I don't know what your so-called random instance is, but it seems that you already understand the concept of these myriad graveyard. Then let's move on to the next question. The inheritance of the Dixian is certainly considerable, but the premise is that you must be able to find the key to open the door. Wang Lu said, isn't the identity of the successor enough? If I still need to find the key, why would I ask you to guard the door? Sword Demon said, in theory, there really isn't a need to go through so much trouble. The key to open the entrance to the myriad graveyard is in my hands, but after 10,000 years, many things can no longer be seen according to the theoretical design. After a pause, Sword Demon said with a smile, in short, the key is lost. Lost. Yes, it's lost. Sword Demon repeated, before my primordial spirit dissipated, the Dixian placed the key in my line of sight, but when I resuscitated from my 10,000 years of sleep, the key has disappeared. In fact, it's not only the key that disappeared. Compared to 10,000 years ago, this ancient sword tomb is too different. There are quite a lot of missing parts, and even the core yin-yang sword division array almost went wrong. Wang Lu asked, "What's the reason?" "There are too many reasons. For example, the Dharma-ending tribulation that occurred 6,000 years ago, which shrouded the entire 9 regions. Although this ancient sword tomb exists independently, it may also have been affected, but the biggest possibility is that this place has been visited by someone." Sword Demon coldly stated his own judgment. "According to the original design of the Dixian, my slumber would only last for a few hundred years at most. Therefore, many of the designs in this place are only valid for a few hundred years. But in fact, it has been more than 10,000 years since the appearance of the Sword Tomb. During the slumber of the Sword Tomb, the concealment spell failed, and some tomb robbers found it and sneaked in. This is also very likely." Wang Lu was silent for a moment. "So, my current task is to find the key that I don't know when and where I lost it? Do you think this matter is reliable? But you have no other choice." Sword Demon said, "If you want to inherit the legacy of the Dixian, you must find the lost key. Of course, it's not like there are no clues at all." Sword Demon stretched out 3 fingers. 3 clues. First, the key has not been destroyed. It really does exist. In fact, the key itself cannot be completely destroyed. Once the old key is destroyed, the legacy of the Dixian will automatically generate a new key and appear in front of me. But since I don't see the key, either the mechanism designed by the Dixian has completely failed, or the key has been taken away by someone else. Second, the key is not an ordinary object. In terms of grade, it is at least an immortal treasure. It has the magical ability to split the heavens and the earth. And such a treasure, in theory, should not be unknown. Third, if you can't find any clues in the known area, you might as well look further. 16,000 years is enough for any changes to happen." After saying these 3 clues, Sword Demon looked at Wang Lu, who was lost in thought, and then gently sighed. "What should be said has been said. Now, it's time to part." Chapter 270. When they parted? Wang Lu was slightly surprised by Sword Demon's sudden farewell, but he immediately felt relieved. Wasn't this a matter of course? Just like the problem he had realized before, Sword Demon Zhong Xingming's resurrection had a very clear purpose. First, it was to purify his primordial spirit and cut off the part that had been corroded by the power of hope, ensuring that he died a pure death. Second, it was to fulfill his promise to the Dixian people and find a qualified successor for them. Now that both of these goals had been accomplished, it seemed that there was no meaning in his life anymore. A qualified hero of the valley should die after passing on his power. What Zhong Xingming wanted to do now seemed to be more or less the same. Thinking of this, Wang Lu had a complicated feeling. Along the way, he had fought a battle of wits and courage with this old devil. Naturally, it couldn't be said that they appreciated each other, but it didn't seem to be to the extent of wanting to tear him to pieces. Considering that before the old man died, he left him a legacy that he didn't understand, and considering that when a person is about to die, his words are always kind, Wang Lu was silent for a moment, and then he slowly opened his mouth and sincerely said, "I will miss you. Sword Demon, you're really disgusting. F***ck. Do you know how hard it is for me to let go of our former enmity and say such kind words?" Sword Demon coldly said, "I don't appreciate you, and you don't have a good impression of me. We are enemies, not friends. Why do you have to pretend to let go of our former enmity? If you didn't struggle so hard and obediently let me take over your body, my primordial spirit wouldn't have dissipated. You bastard, hurry up and die. Don't worry, I have a premonition that we will meet again. I don't want to see you again, you wretch. Is that so? I feel that it won't be long before you start to miss me, although this kind of feeling makes me even more disgusted. TSK, since it's so disgusting, the sooner you die, the sooner you'll be safe. While the two were talking, Sword Demon's figure gradually faded away, becoming more and more transparent. Obviously, the power that kept his primordial spirit condensed had begun to dissipate. Wang Lu didn't want to say another word even though he still had many questions in his mind. He just silently watched the sword devil disappear. This could be regarded as a little bit of respect for this top sword cultivator in the 9 regions. No matter how the two of them fought, it could not be denied that Sword Demon was definitely a worthy opponent. After an unknown amount of time, Sword Devil's silhouette disappeared from his line of sight. Wang Lu let out a disappointed sigh. His heart felt somewhat empty. What's that old saying? Do humans have a deep memory of everyone who has entered their body? Shaking his head, Wang Lu threw this rotten sentence to the back of his mind. He began to pull himself together, tidied up the old mountains and rivers, and operated his cultivation method to repair the various scars caused by the fierce battle just now. Although the world inside his body seemed to be peaceful and the traces of Sword Demon's havoc had disappeared without a trace, but after reconnecting his jade mansion with his body, Wang Lu could clearly feel all kinds of hidden injuries. The original intention of Sword Demon to seize his body was not fake. After he gained control of his body, he immediately carried out a transformation to make this body more suitable for the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword. Now that Sword Demon was no longer there, those transformation and Wang Lu's non-phase method seemed incompatible. Especially the 206 non-phase sword bones that supported the heaven and earth, most of them were damaged, and many of them were simply thrown aside like garbage. Perhaps this scene could not be healed in a short period of time. However, the advantage of non-phase method was that it was extremely adaptable. Even if it was missing an arm or a leg, it could still maintain its operation. Wang Lu spent some time to make a preliminary adjustment to his body, took a long breath, and began to think about the next problem. It was also a crucial problem. How could he get out? Opening his eyes and looking at the empty space around him, Wang Lu helplessly shrugged his shoulders. According to the three-dimensional map shown by Sword Demon, this was the lowest level of the ancient sword tomb, completely isolated from the outside world. Unless the conditions were met, the passage would not be opened. But the problem was, the conditions should be met, but what about the passage? Didn't they say that as long as they found the successor, they could leave? Now that the successor was standing here alive and well, where was the passage? Did they mean that only by getting the key could they smoothly leave? Or could it be that when Dixian designed the ancient sword tomb, the passage was designed for Sword Demon? Perhaps in their opinion, after the successor was selected, Sword Demon would come out together with him, so it didn't matter who it was designed for. They probably didn't expect that in 10,000 years, the world had changed into mulberry fields, and too many things had changed. No wonder Sword Demon, before his death, maliciously prophesied that it would not be long before he would miss him. It turned out that he was waiting for him here. Now that Sword Demon was dead, it was impossible for him to come back to life again. If he wanted to go out. Wang Lu once again looked around, and in his heart, there was a little speculation. According to Sword Demon, he was originally going to seize Wang Lu's body, break the seal of Dixian with his own ability, and escape. Then, since Sword Demon could do it, perhaps he could also do it? It would be strange if he could. Because Sword Demon had the primordial spirit of a Mahayana stage cultivator, after seizing the body, he could quickly restore his realm. However, he had not yet passed the tribulation of the King Pill, so even if he cultivated for 10,000 years in this place that was isolated from the main path, it would be impossible. Or... A light flashed in Wang Lu's mind, and his eyes immediately looked down. Next to him, Zhu Shiryao was still unconscious. The sequela of being forcibly seized by the primordial spirit of a Mahayana stage cultivator was still there. Speaking of which, Wang Lu's luck was pretty good. When Sword Demon's primordial spirit tried to seize his body, it was blocked by Wang Lu's indiscriminately destructive move. Even his jade mansion couldn't penetrate, let alone his Zifu. Otherwise, his own Zifu would be a bit looser than Zhu Shiyao's, and he didn't have the ability to be where the light was and where the god was. Well, let's not talk too much. Now, to talk about the way to get out, perhaps it would fall on this big sister. Of course, it was not that Zhu Shiyao's stellar sword method was so heaven-defying that she could break the seal of Dixian with her shoot on stage, but if the quality was not enough, the quantity would make up for it. 2 shoot-on stage cultivators, of course, could not be compared with Zhong Xingming, who was at the peak of Mahayana stage, but if there were 1,000 or 10,000 shoot-on stage cultivators, wouldn't that be a lot better? As for where to find 10,000 shoot-on stage cultivators, wasn't that simple? In this endless vast space, wasn't there a man and a woman? As long as he carried forward the spirit of the foolish old man moving the mountain, he believed that the seal of Dixian would not be difficult for them. Thinking of this, Wang Lu looked at his senior sister more and more seriously. Although the few times he spent with senior sister were not pleasant, objectively speaking, Zhu Shiyao was still a rare beauty. Especially when she fainted and retracted that indifferent and sharp gaze, it showed a bit of a woman's gentle temperament. Why not, just let the goodies flow into the field of others for once? In any case, at this time, he was idle, so Wang Lu simply planned his future children's education strategy. He also took out a pen and paper to record it in detail. When he was writing the Ghost Father chapter, he suddenly heard Zhu Shiyao softly moan. "Water, water." Wang Lu suddenly stopped writing. He saw that Zhu Shiyao seemed to be experiencing a nightmare. Her eyebrows were tightly knitted, her face was pale, and her cheeks were covered with beads of sweat. She seemed to be in extreme pain. Water. Although he was not clear about the situation, Zhu Shiyao subconsciously called out repeatedly, so she must be dehydrated. But when Wang Lu heard this, he could not help but be stunned. "Eldest senior sister, where do you want me to find water in this barren land? Do you dare to drink the water of the bitter sea?" As a professional adventurer, he naturally had sufficient supplies when he went out. His mustard seed bag had always been prepared with water and food, but now he could not open the mustard seed bag. Because Wang Lu had been possessed by the sword demon, his true name on the mustard seed bag was slightly inconsistent, so he could not open it. Of course, this was only a trivial problem that could be solved in a short while, but, water, water. Damn, why are you in such a hurry? Then, Wang Lu thought about it. If he had to find water, it was not that he did not have it. He could not find pure water, but did he not have Boy X? Just as he thought of this, his waist suddenly shook. It turned out that the mustard seed bag had been opened. It was unclear whether he was disappointed or something else. Wang Lu let out a long breath, took out a delicate full water bag from the mustard seed bag, and held it in his hand. Then he looked at Zhu Shiyao who was moaning on the ground, somewhat at a loss. What should I do next? Feed her water? How? Or, when she opened her mouth and moaned, I opened the water bag and poured the water in? Well, although Zhu Shiyao's cherry mouth was a little small, there was an oil seller who could pour oil from copper coins. As an immortal cultivator, am I not as good as an old grandpa? Thinking of this, Wang Lu stood up and began to seriously aim. When he was properly aimed, he opened the stopper. Suddenly, a clear stream of water flowed down, falling exactly on Zhu Shiyao's slightly open mouth. At this time, Zhu Shiyao shook her head in pain. Then, the water splashed on her face, and the droplets flowed down her smooth neck, wetting the front of her clothes. F***ck, I'll kill you. Wang Lu was exasperated, thinking that when the oil seller poured the oil, the gourd on the ground did not disturb him. There was no other way. Since Grand Senior Sister was so uncooperative, Wang Lu could only work a little harder. He bent down and carried her upper body with one arm, his palm supporting her head from behind, and the other hand holding the water bag, slowly feeding her water. However, just as the water entered her throat, Zhu Shiyao began to struggle violently. "No, no. Don't drown me, don't. F***ck, you were F***king watering, so it wasn't because you lacked water, but because you had a nightmare and were drowned in a flood." Just as Wang Lu felt as if he was struck by lightning, an extremely familiar female voice, with an incomparably complex laughter, resounded in the sky above him. "Ward round. Ward round. You two bastards are hugging and whispering sweet nothings here. Are you engaged in an illegal sex trade? Why is Yao struggling so much?" And her body was soaked in water, exposing her body. F***ck, how dare you, Wang Lu? How dare you rape your Grand Senior Sister in broad daylight, you're going against the heavens. As she spoke, a beautiful white figure descended from the sky. Looking at the petrified Wang Lu, and then at Zhu Shiyao who was still immersed in the nightmare of the flood, the woman snorted coldly, her expression solemn, and said sternly, "Bring me along?" Chapter 271. Master? Not knowing how long it took, Wang Lu finally recovered from his shock. He put down his senior sister, who was in his arms, and then forcefully shook his head, still feeling somewhat incredulous. In fact, after experiencing the previous unfolding of divinity, Wang Lu's nerves have long been sharpened to the point of being abnormally thick. Thus, in this ancient sword tomb, no matter what happened, it was not surprising. However, he still didn't expect that he would see his dear master at this time. The woman in white coldly snorted. "Nonsense, so wise and powerful, like a god descending to earth, isn't that your beloved master?" Wang Lu sighed. "Hearing your shameless opening remarks, I'm relieved, it should not be someone else in disguise." With that, Wang Lu's complexion sank. "What's the situation?" Regarding the appearance of his master, Wang Lu was extremely shocked, but in fact, he had already expected that the sect elders might come to the rescue. After all, before going deep into the last layer, Lu Li and Little Bai had already evacuated, so they would inevitably report the situation to the sect. Similarly, after the three sects were eliminated, Shengjing sect, 10,000 Art sect, and Kunlun sect would certainly contact their sect elders to inquire about the next step. And after knowing the progress of the matter, the elders of these sects would not be indifferent, especially the elders of Spirit Sword Mountain, who should be very clear about the difficulties that he and Zhu Shiyao encountered. Not only he had the team leader's handbook, he also kept a copy of it in the Heavenly Sword Hall. His senior sister and himself were in an extremely dangerous state. Considering that one of them was the lead disciple and the other was the big sister, they would undoubtedly be the mainstay of the Lingjian school for the next hundreds of thousands of years. Naturally, the sect would not save them. It was one thing to let the disciple experience hardship, but another thing to let the disciple die. For this reason, it would not be surprising if the elders of the Heavenly Sword Hall all came out together. However, Wang Lu didn't expect that the first one to appear would be his master. If he was the only one trapped here, then that would be fine. But, his big sister was also here, could it be that the sect leader would be indifferent? Therefore, Wang Lu was very suspicious about the situation outside. The situation is very chaotic. Wang Wu said concisely, the four major sects have all been alerted, and the elder group is currently quarreling up there. In a simple sentence, he had the time, place, and people. The outline of the situation in the outside world was also outlined. The fact that the four major sects were alarmed was undoubtedly bad news, but it was still better than the worst-case scenario. At least the elders of the 4 major sects were arguing rather than fighting each other. As for why Wang Wu came alone, there seemed to be an explanation. Feng Yin Daoist master and the other elders were obviously wrangling with the other sects, especially the elders of Xingjing sect. His identity was too sensitive, so it was impossible for him to go in alone. No, they are quarreling outside because no one can come in. Wang Wu lightly said, the last layer of the ancient sword tomb has a special restriction, which, in addition to the specially selected people, will prevent anyone else from entering. This restriction secretly contains the 4 in 9 divine tribulations. Although it is weak, it's the genuine wrath of the heaven. Unless the elders of the 4 sects can use a wonderful method to break the restriction, they can only risk their lives to fight against the 4 in 9 divine tribulations. When I came here, they were still arguing about the method to break the restriction. The 10,000 Arts sect is fighting against the other 3 sects alone and seems to have the upper hand. Unfortunately, according to their method, it would take at least 3 to 5 months to break the restriction. And then? While asking, Wang Lu incredulously looked at his master. The existence of the 4 in 9 divine tribulations was not strange. When Zhong Xingming was seriously injured, his primordial spirit was likely mixed with the energy of the 4 in 9 divine tribulations, which was then extracted by Dixian and used as a restriction. However, regarding the restriction of Dixian, even the 10,000 Arts sect was at a loss, so how did his master come in? Was it because her moral integrity was particularly worthless, far below the lowest limit of human beings? Therefore, in the eyes of the ancient sword tomb's identification system, she was simply not a person, but only a dead object such as gravel and dead leaves, so she was specially let in? Then I took the opportunity while they were quarreling and left first. What about the 4 in 9 divine tribulations? Wang Lu knowingly asked because it was really hard to believe. Wang Wu nonchalantly said, it's not the complete version of the 4 in 9 divine tribulations, can't I just directly break in? Directly break in? Wang Wu frowned and asked, what's so difficult to understand? It's like cutting a tangled hemp with a knife. It's like if you pursue a girl, no matter what, you can't get her, so wouldn't it be a matter of course to drug her? I think there's a big difference in our values. Come on, you obviously just raped Yao Er. That's just a misunderstanding. Oh? That's a misunderstanding? Do you think Yao Er will believe me if I tell her about it when she wakes up? Wang Lu looked down at Grand Senior Sister who was still unconscious. He felt that it would probably be difficult to defeat his master, whose moral integrity was lower than the limit of human beings, on this topic, so he could only change the topic. In other words, you braved the 4 in 9 divine tribulations and risked your life to save me? When he said that, it seemed that his master's image suddenly became taller. No matter how serious her moral integrity was, it was undeniable that she was, after all, a rare good master. Wang Wu was a little embarrassed. Oh, it's not as great as you say. It's just an incomplete version of the 4 in 9 divine tribulations, what's the big deal about it? It's not life-threatening at all. His master said it lightly, but Wang Lu couldn't help but be shocked. Just an incomplete version of the 4 in 9 divine tribulations? That was a restriction that even Sword Devil Zhong Xingming didn't have full confidence in breaking, but you came all the way, as if it was nothing? Master, you're really just King Pill, are you kidding me? Wang Wu didn't want to talk too much about this topic, so she shrugged and asked, anyway, what happened here? Wang Lu didn't have anything to hide from his master, so he told her the whole story in detail. Regarding the fierce battle between Wang Lu and Sword Devil, although his master didn't say it out loud, she slightly nodded and showed a look of approval. But when she heard about Dixian, her expression changed. Tisk, 10 million tombs? That's really a big deal. To Wang Lu's surprise, when he heard about Dixian's inheritance, his master didn't show an insatiable expression, but instead showed a look of disgust. She didn't care about the 10 million immortal treasures at all. Wang Lu naturally wouldn't miss this detail. He guessed that his master probably knew about the existence of Dixian, and it was very likely that they had dealt with each other. However, since they hadn't mentioned this topic for 10 years, it was obvious that his master didn't intend to talk about it. So, as the legitimate successor, what are you going to do? His master shook her head and asked. Wang Lu said, I haven't thought about it yet, but I can't swallow it all by myself. Wang Wu smiled. Yes, this is not an inheritance for 1 or 2 people to monopolize. 10 million immortal treasures were not like sleeping beauties that just lay there waiting to be plucked, but treasures that needed great effort to get. If every instance was as difficult as the ancient sword tomb, Wang Lu didn't think that he would have the patience to break through the 10 million levels. Moreover, things like immortal treasures were not always good. Generally speaking, it was enough for a cultivator to have at most 2 or 3 personal magical treasures. Any more would just be a burden. Of course, the 9 regions was big, and there were indeed some local tyrant cultivators with countless magical treasures. However, in actual combat, they were not necessarily much stronger than ordinary cultivators. Therefore, there was once a wise cultivator who joked that magical treasures for cultivators were like Taoist companions. Opening a harem and having tens of thousands of Taoist companions sounded very good and powerful, but in fact, it would only make people lose their minds. Therefore, Wang Lu didn't intend to monopolize the 10 million immortal treasures left by Dixian, because there was a better way to make use of it than monopolizing it. Before that sword demon died, he left me something really precious. Wang Lu said and then stretched out his hand to project an image that was imprinted in his primordial spirit. It was a huge, bright like a galaxy network, and at the same time, it was also a 3-dimensional map of the 10 million Dixian tomb. This is the real priceless inheritance. The 10 million immortal treasures are just empty, but if this map is sold at a high price to Xingjing sect, that kind of spendthrift, the benefits are real. Wang Wu said, yes, it would be a waste if I don't rip off that group of local tyrants. However, there is a premise, and that is to find the legendary key. Wang Lu nodded. Master, do you have any clues? I want to. Wang Wu helplessly said, according to what you said, that key is at least an immortal treasure. If I had a clue, I would have snatched it and sold it for money. After a pause, Wang Wu said, but, although I don't have a clue, I know someone who definitely has it. But, let's talk about this when we get back to the mountain. Right now, sect leader and the others must be anxiously waiting. With that, Wang Wu pulled her disciple's hand, hugged Zhu Shiyao at her side, and then soared into the sky, flying toward the dark sky. Lightning flashed in the sky, and the black fog tumbled. The closer they got, the more intimidating Wang Lu felt, which made it difficult for him to breathe. That was the power of the 4 in 9 divine tribulations. Although it was just a remnant of the real divine tribulation extracted from the primordial spirit of Sword Demon by the Dixian, it was still the wrath of the heaven, which was not something that a mortal could challenge. Wang Lu's non-phase method was actually quite profound, even Sword Demon inadvertently fell into his trap. However, at this time, in the face of the 4 in 9 divine tribulations, Wang Lu felt a deep sense of powerlessness and fear. Then, an invisible and transparent shield wrapped around him, and the depression in his heart suddenly disappeared. Wang Lu smiled, knowing that his master had propped up her non-phase sword defense. In fact, she brought Wang Lu and Zhu Shiyao up, wasn't it to show her invincible power to resist the divine tribulation? Previously, when Wang Lu talked about how Sword Demon taught him the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword, his master just smiled without saying a word. She didn't refute Zhong Shengming's disparaging remarks about non-phase method. However, Wang Lu was very clear that it was not that his master didn't care about it. Although she was not narrow-minded, to say that she was broad-minded, it was only limited to the physical level. Spiritually, she was definitely not a generous person. She didn't care about it because Zhong Xingming was not present, so what was the point of arguing? But she could speak with facts. You think non-phase method is not good enough? Then I'll let you see the real fierceness of non-phase method. Seeing that the blue dome of the sky was approaching and the 4 in 9 divine tribulations was just around the corner, Wang Lu took a deep breath and suppressed the instinctive uneasiness in his heart. Next, it was time to witness a miracle. The next moment, the emerald green sword light went straight through the sky. The black clouds that filled the sky were wrapped in lightning, but they were firmly isolated by the sword light, unable to enter even half a step. The 4 in 9 divine tribulations contained the infinite changes of the heavenly Tao. Wang Lu only felt that his whole body was sometimes shining, sometimes dim. Countless mysterious changes bloomed and extinguished in front of his eyes. For a moment, he felt dizzy and dizzy. However, no matter how many changes the heavenly tribulation launched, no matter how many rounds of attacks it launched, under the emerald green sword light, all of them vanished into thin air. His master carried a person in each of her hands and only used her primordial spirit to control the sword, yet the sword defense was flawless. Even the 4 in 9 divine tribulations could not shake it. A moment later, the clouds broke through the sky. Looking at the long-lost light in front of him, Wang Lu couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Master, you're really awesome. Chapter 272. Wang Lu followed his master to break through the 4 in 9 divine tribulations, saw the long-lost light, and also saw the long-lost elders of the sect. A familiar face with an incomparably surprised look appeared in mid-air. Obviously, no one expected that the master and disciple of the non-phase peak would appear at this time. Similarly, Wang Lu also didn't expect to see so many people. The arrival of the elders was not surprising, but what was surprising was that several Heavenly Sword Hall elders who usually appeared were actually there, including the sect leader. Lu Xian, Fang He, Lu Li, Hua Yun, and even Ao Guanhai were all present. The Heavenly Sword Hall's entire family had moved, and the lineup was luxurious, completely contrary to common sense. Who would send out all the elders of the sect just to do something? Now that all the cultivators who could fight on the Spirit Sword Mountain had come out, what should they do when the Spirit Sword Mountain was empty? Even though Lingjian School was one of the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League, had a transcendent status, and had no natural enemy in the Blue River region, but this kind of behavior, no matter how one looked at it, was like the demeanor of a crazy girl. Of course, to say that Spirit Sword Mountain was defenseless was not necessarily true. Although all the cultivators who could fight had come out, there were still a few ordinary people who could fight. Whether it was the red-eyed poor lady boss at the foot of the mountain, or the chef who spent all his skill points on swordsmanship, all of them were enough to suppress the scene. However, this time, the Heavenly Sword Hall was still enough to show the importance that Lingjian School attached to Wang Lu and Zhu Shiyao, which was difficult for any other sect to match. Wang Lu didn't say it out loud, but inwardly, he was moved. The number of people in Lingjian School had withered, but the cohesiveness of the sect was really indescribable. When he saw the elders of Spirit Sword Sect, Wang Lu also saw the elders of the other 3 sections. The situation was indeed like what his master said. At present, 10,000 Arts Sect was using their mouth to fight the other 3 sections. After all, no one could match 10,000 Arts Sect in the research of restriction breaking. However, on the other hand, Shengjing Sect, 10,000 Arts Sect, and Kunlun Sect had secretly joined hands to contend against Spirit Sword Sect. Although the 3 sects were still in dispute, the several elders of Lingjian School were actually together, leaving the several people of Lingjian School out. The reason was very simple. The Heavenly Sword Hall had turned out in full force, which gave the Spirit Sword Sect an overwhelming advantage in force. Although the most powerful elders of Lingjian school was Yuanying stage had come out 7 people, it was equivalent to the other 2 sects. The other 2 sects had an overwhelming advantage. Thus, the Lingjian school had formed a loose alliance. The symbol of the spirit sword sect's most powerful force, the Heavenly Sword Hall, suddenly sent 7 people, which was almost equivalent to the sum of the elders of the other 2 sections. Thus, in order to balance the 3 sects, a loose alliance was formed. 10 sect sword 10 sect disciples from the other 3 sects were sect. When Wang Lu eliminated everyone else and entered the deepest level of the sword tomb with Zhu Shiryao, the competition between the disciples had already ended. No matter how dissatisfied the 3 sects were, they could only concede defeat. However, when Wang Lu and Zhu Shiryao were trapped in the sword tomb, the elders of Lingjian school directly broke the outer layer of the sword tomb, which was used to isolate the seal above the king pill. This was tantamount to breaking the previous tacit understanding of not dispatching elder-level cultivators. Thus, a new competition began. The original result was invalid, and everyone had to rely on their own means. At present, the elders of the several sects were trying their best to get a bigger share of this sword tomb treasure house. Previously, when they swept the first few layers, each of them had a good harvest. Only the Lingjian school was indifferent to the treasures along the way. Obviously, all of their attention was on the last layer. And everyone knew that the most precious treasure of this sword tomb was hidden in the deepest part. The previous harvest was just an appetizer, the real feast would be left for later. Of course, this delicious meal would undoubtedly be a long wait. According to the calculation of 10,000 art sect, even if the 4 sects joined forces, it would still be difficult to break this immortal level restriction in a few months. During this period, there were too many changes that could happen, so they must be particularly careful. Just as the elders of the several sects raised their vigilance and prepared to fight a protracted battle, suddenly, a violent shock came from under their feet. A tingling and paralyzing aura spread out. At the same time, the 10,000 art sect elder, who was carefully measuring the restriction on the bottom layer, exclaimed, "The power of the divine tribulation has begun to boil." To the elders present, this extremely weak 49 heavenly tribulation might not be able to take their lives if it continued to spread. However, none of them wanted to be struck half-dead by the tribulation lightning for no reason. Hearing that the heavenly tribulation was showing signs of going out of control, everyone flew into the air and cast defensive spells to ensure that everything was fine. In the next moment, these elders who were on high alert saw the master and disciple breaking out of the ground. A certain unconscious senior sister was taken as luggage. As a result, under the great psychological shock, they were all dumbfounded, completely at a loss of what to do. If they were sneak attacked at this time, more than half of these elders would suffer a loss. Fortunately, after all, their cultivation base was extraordinary, so they quickly recovered their senses. "How could it be you guys?" The leading elder of Xingjing sect, Supreme Tianyu, tightly frowned. At the same time, his palm has been placed on his personal spiritual treasure, the hilt of the heavenly moon monster blade. As the supreme with the highest cultivation base among them, he had long been dissatisfied with the strength of the Lingjian school. Because whether it was within the Xingjing sect or on behalf of the elders to deal with external affairs, Supreme Tianyu had always been strong to the end. When had he ever bowed his head to outsiders? And when he was poached by Xingjing sect as a monster cultivator to be an elder, it was also because of his strong and aggressive way of doing things. In this trip, he was in a hurry, so he didn't have time to bring along his assistants who had a tacit understanding with him. The 3 Xingjing sect elders that followed him had the title of elder, but they were all wine bags and rice bags. On the way here, he had a conflict with the sect leader of Lingjian school. Devil blade against spiritual sword, he obviously had an overwhelming advantage in terms of realm, but he did not gain the upper hand. In addition, there were many people in Lingjian school, so he had no choice but to be vigilant and restrain himself. However, Supreme Tianyu did not give up. If he could seize the opportunity, he did not mind turning against the Lingjian school. In any case, he was just an elder of Xingjing sect, unlike Feng Yin who was the sect head and had no freedom to do things. And Supreme Tianyu was one of the Xingjing sect's elders who did the dirty work. As long as there was a suitable opportunity, he could exaggerate things. And now, it seemed like the opportunity to do things had come to him. Previously, the four sects were blocked by Dixian's restriction, and no one could break through it. Later on, under the initiative of the 10,000 Art sect, the several sects made an agreement to first break the restriction and rescue the people. As for the true immortal's inheritance hidden in the deepest part, it would be distributed according to how much effort each sect put into breaking the restriction. During the cooperation period, the four sects would exchange their respective technology, and they must not conceal it maliciously. Especially when there was a breakthrough in the restriction-breaking technology, they could not hide it from the other three sections. Because this was the basis of the cooperation. Among the four sects, it was difficult for any one of them to break the restriction by themselves. This required the exchange of technology, and in the process of exchange, anything could happen. For example, Lingjian school was slightly weak in pure technical theory, but it was likely that through the exchange of technology from the other three sects, they would be inspired and find the correct method to break the restriction first. This was very likely to happen. If there was no restriction, no one would feel at ease to exchange technology, and the cooperation would no longer exist. However, right now, there was still no breakthrough in the technical problem, but someone from Lingjian school had already gone deep into the lower level and brought back their disciple. What did this mean? It meant that this group of smelly and shameless country bumpkins of Blue River Valley had finally begun to court death. If not for this, it would be really difficult for him to find an opportunity to make his move. After all, without the help of the other sects, it was impossible for him to deal with so many people from Heavenly Sword Hall. However, the sudden change in Lingjian school gave everyone a reasonable reason to sanction them. As long as they could defeat Lingjian school first, among the remaining three sects, Xingjing sect would be the strongest. However, just as Supreme Tianyu was about to make his move, the 10,000 Art sect elder incredulously asked, "How did you guys do it? The restriction obviously hasn't been broken yet." Unlike Supreme Tianyu, who wholeheartedly wanted to fish in troubled waters, the 10,000 Art sect elder was more concerned about the technology than the true immortal's inheritance at the bottom of the sword tomb. In his view, since the restriction hadn't been broken, it meant that the people of Spirit Sword sect didn't tear up the agreement. At most, they just touched the edge of the agreement. However, compared to the spirit of the agreement, he was more concerned about how Wang Wu could freely come and go. Therefore, when he opened his mouth, he talked about the technology and never mentioned the previous agreement. Supreme Tianyu immediately inwardly cursed this group of technical nerds for ruining things. He was not blind, how could he not see the problem in the way Wang Wu broke through the restriction? Although he didn't believe that a king pill could withstand the 4 in 9 divine tribulations, he also knew that the people of Lingjian school would not be stupid enough to dig their own grave by tearing up the agreement. There must be a reason for this. However, he didn't intend to reason with the people of Lingjian school. He only needed an excuse to make his move. What's there to say to this group of treacherous, despicable people? Supreme Tianyu roared and threw out the monster knife in his hand. The knife flickered, which contained the magical ability of his unity stage. Vaguely, there was a heavenly tribulation-like oppressive power. Even though Wang Wu was known as the number 1 king pill in 9 regions, above the king pill was the Yuanying stage, above the Yuanying stage was the deity stage, and above the deity stage was the unity stage. Even if there were 100 king pills, they would still be broken by the full power strike of a unity stage cultivator. At that time, even if someone didn't want to fight, it would be impossible. Therefore, Tian Yu's attack was particularly fast, giving no time for people to react. And ever since Supreme Tian Yu mastered his method, his monster knife had never missed its target. Clang! Just as Tian Yu roared and inwardly guessed that Wang Wu would be seriously injured, he heard the sound of metal clashing, and his original monster blade was bounced back by a tremendous force. The next moment, he saw Feng Yin Daoist master reach out his hand to recall his flying sword with a cold face. No matter how fast Tian Yu's monster knife was, it couldn't be caught by the stellar divine eyes. Before Tian Yu could make his move, Feng Yin had already intercepted his sneak attack. However, after this sword strike, Feng Yin was somewhat embarrassed. If he counterattacked, it would be exactly what he wanted, but if he stopped the fight, Tian Yu would not give up so easily. While he was hesitating, sure enough, he saw Tian Yu reveal a grin and his monster knife was about to attack again. However, at this time, an unexpected change interrupted Tian Yu. Wang Lu, you still have the nerve to come out. On the Xingjing sect side, when a certain disciple saw Wang Lu, his eyes were exceptionally red. Ignoring the fact that the elders were present, the disciples needed to be careful with their words and actions. The anger in his mind surged up and he roared. With this interruption, Tian Yu's monster knife could no longer be swung down. The topic shifted to Wang Lu. As a great elder, he couldn't bully a small disciple, right? Tian Yu fiercely glared at that disciple, but then he saw that the one who spoke was an elite inner court disciple, Wang Yuelwanyu. When Wang Yuelwanyu saw Wang Lu, her face was full of anger and she gnashed her teeth. Seeing this familiar woman's face, Wang Lu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Ever since this woman suffered a loss from him, it was simply unforgettable. It was as if she gave birth to his child. ****, I don't remember looking for such a stupid woman. However, the next moment, he saw Wang Yuelwanyu restrain her anger and instead, a malicious smile appeared on her face. Wang Lu, have you ever heard of a person called Stellar Fairy Wang Lulu? As soon as this remark came out, the sound of water spraying suddenly resounded in the square. Stellar Fairy, that was probably someone's dark history that would be difficult to wash away in his lifetime. Hearing this, many people immediately became spirited, ready to see how Wang Lu would explain it. No matter how much Wang Lu despised moral integrity, under the watchful eyes of the public, he either denied it or admitted that he had done something shameful, but in the end, he fell into a predicament. However, this was called bringing evil upon oneself. At that time, if he didn't use Stellar Fairy to clear the square, how could this happen? Under the malicious eyes of the crowd, Wang Lu calmly became the focus and then smiled. Stellar Fairy Wang Lulu? That's my master. With that, he pointed his finger at his master, who was watching the show. In the dead silence, Wang Lu eloquently argued. As we all know, Lingjian School's care and love for its disciples is second to none in the Wanxian League. This time, the exploration of the ancient sword tomb is full of thorns. How could the school let us explore on our own? Therefore, before I left, my master created an avatar to follow me and protect me. Because of the restriction here, no one above the King Pill is allowed to enter. Therefore, this avatar does not have too much magical power and is only used to give strategic guidance when needed. In fact, the reason why I was able to crush all of you in terms of IQ is because of my master's guidance. As for Stellar Fairy Wang Lulu, of course, it was also because of my beautiful and enchanting master. Otherwise, do you think I am the one who has a fetish for cross-dressing? Of course, some people may ask, can King Pill cultivators also create an avatar? This question, I think after careful consideration, will be answered. Don't forget, my master is a rare double King Pill cultivator, so creating an avatar is very easy. If you don't believe me, you can also cultivate the second King Pill and see if you can also create an avatar. Finally, for those who insist that stellar fairy is related to me, such as junior sister Wang Yue, I want to say, I wish you better go further and further on the road of Fujoshi. Chapter 273. In the depths of the ancient sword tomb, Wang Lu's confident voice resounded in all directions. Facing the gaze of many Yuanying, deity, and even unity stage supremes, he was not in a hurry and just kept on talking. However, not everyone was as comfortable as Wang Lu. Enough! Tian Yu roared, interrupting Wang Lu's speech. Seeing that Wang Lu's speech was about to win the applause of the audience, although many people knew that what he said was pure nonsense, it was so wonderful that they really felt apologetic if they didn't applaud. Tian Yu knew that if he didn't stop it, the topic would be diverted by him, and he would no longer have the opportunity to fish in troubled waters. We are not interested in whether you have a cross-dressing fetish or not. Let's talk about your harvest down there first. Tian Yu went straight to the point and simply revealed the face of a bandit. In any case, he was notorious in the Wuxia League, so at this time, he was the most suitable to play the villain. If the people of Kunlun sect and 10,000 Arts sect were not willing to pick, then he would pick. In any case, what he said was also what everyone thought, so he was not worried that it would not be echoed. If Kunlun sect and 10,000 Arts sect did not want to get the inheritance of the true immortal down there, why would they come all the way to help the people of Lingjian school? Were they that humanitarian? In fact, everyone was not interested in how Wang Wu broke through the restriction, of course, except for the people of 10,000 Arts sect. They only cared about one question, which was, how would these changes affect the distribution of the true immortal's inheritance? Sure enough, although many people frowned, no one opposed it. Their eyes were still focused on Wang Lu, but they were not concerned about the stellar fairy, but about his harvest in the lower level. It stood to reason that no matter how much harvest Wang Lu had in the lower level, it seemed that it had nothing to do with the other sections. However, the things in this world often didn't have that much reason to talk about. What's more, when the Lingjian school judged that Wang Lu and Zhu Shiyao could not escape by themselves and sent the elders of the Heavenly Sword Hall to save them, it meant that they had given up the original results of the battle and had to fight for the distribution of the inheritance again. Of course, in this process, Lingjian school's share would definitely be more than the other sects, but it would be impossible for them to monopolize it. Moreover, looking at Tian Yu Supreme's actions, it was obvious that he wanted a large share of the pie. However, this was also a long-standing rule of the Wuxia League. Although the people from Lingjian school were unhappy about this, they wouldn't go so far as to completely ignore the rules of the Wuxia League. The next step would be to argue with the other three sects and divide the benefits. However, no one present would have thought that the inheritance in the deepest part of the world would exceed everyone's expectations. You want to see the rewards? Wang Lu nodded. He stretched out his hand and projected an image from his primordial spirit, showing it to everyone. Look, this is it. What they saw in front of them was a galaxy-like bright network. Tens of thousands of nodes were connected by a thin line, slowly moving, and the trajectory seemed to have an elusive rule. Wang Lu's generous display was quite unexpected. Even the several elders of Lingjian school cast a surprised look. Although this lead disciple of Spirit Sword sect was not stingy, according to his character, he would never be so easy to deal with. Especially when Supreme Tian Yu put on a rude and unreasonable face, it was easy to make Wang Lu unyielding. However, although he generously displayed such a network, what was its specific use? Was this the legendary true immortal level inheritance? This is a map. Wang Lu explained, a treasure map that leads to the deeper part. Look, this is where we are. Along with the change of Wang Lu's intention, the network was rapidly enlarged, but the focus was focused on one point. This point is the ancient sword tomb that we are at. In fact, this is not a sword tomb, but for the time being, let's call it that. Wang Lu said, and found that the faces of the elders of the several sects had changed. It was very simple. If such a magnificent tomb could only play the role of a point on the star map, then wouldn't those tens of thousands of light points be tens of thousands of immortal treasures? Everyone could think of this, and similarly, everyone could also think of the contradiction. If Wang Lu took out 2 or 3 immortal treasures, or even 20 or 30 immortal treasures, everyone would be surprised and would choose to believe it. However, tens of thousands of immortal treasures were too outrageous. Are you playing with us? Supreme Tianyu coldly said. After all, he still didn't give up on solving the problem by force. The monster blade in his hand was simply unbearable. Wang Lu responded, whether I'm playing with you or not, everyone can see it. With that, he continued to enlarge the star map, infinitely expanding the point that represented the sword tomb into a 3-dimensional map with a radius of several dozens of feet. This is the panoramic map of the sword tomb, which records every detail. Everyone can compare it with what you have seen and heard to see if it matches. After several elders carefully identified it, they all nodded. Tianyu sneered and said, "Your master used some unknown method to sneak in without us knowing, so naturally, he will tell you what he saw along the way. Now that it's confirmed, what's so strange about it? What can it prove?" Supreme Tianyu, you're wrong. An elder of 10,000 Arts sect said, "There are clearly many places in this map that we have never discovered before. If it's confirmed, it can indeed explain the origin of this map." Tianyu glared at that elder. Our 4 sects arrived one after another, and Lingjian school was the first. Moreover, along the way, can you ensure that every action of every person in Lingjian school is under your control? What's so strange about them unearthing some secrets of the sword tomb when people are not paying attention? Not to mention that even if this map is correct, it doesn't mean that other parts are also correct. Tens of thousands of immortal treasures, yet he dares to indulge in fantasy. This statement somewhat had the flavor of sophistry, which immediately made the 10,000 Arts sect elders wrinkle their brows, ready to argue with this Supreme of Unity stage. However, how could Supreme Tianyu be interested in arguing with people? Although he was used to sophistry, he was not a reckless and ignorant fool. Otherwise, the Xingjing sect would have long suppressed this troublemaking monster cultivator for thousands of years. He certainly knew that the authenticity of Wang Lu's map was very high, but he insisted on using this as a breakthrough, which made him overbearing. Actually, he wanted Wang Lu to come up with more information to prove it. If you said the map is real, then there must be evidence, right? And this evidence was the key. Since Wang Lu was willing to calmly take out the map, naturally, he had something more important than the map in his hand. And what Tianyu wanted was precisely that more important thing. Otherwise, if Wang Lu threw him a bone, wouldn't Tianyu be grateful and run to gnaw it? Greed was insatiable and insatiable. When given an inch, one would want a foot. Although these 2 qualities had been criticized for a long time, as a demon cultivator born in an environment of natural selection, these 2 qualities played a great role in Supreme Tianyu's achievements today. If you can put tens of thousands of immortal treasures in front of us, even if your Lingjian school takes 99% of them, while the rest of us divide a few, I have no objection. Supreme Tianyu's eyes flickered, but it's not that easy to fool us with a treasure map that is hard to distinguish. At this time, a long-bearded elder representing Kunlun sect slowly said, "Lingjian school's fellow Taoists, if you have more harvest, you might as well say it. We're not robbers, we won't be unreasonable to snatch your spoils, but at least we should know how many things there are in total. This is the general rule of the Wanxian League." Wang Wu sneered, "Rules? Lingjian school is a super sect of the Wanxian League. Don't you feel weak to use the Wanxian League's rules to oppress us? What's more, I won't abide by the rules today, what can you do? Economic sanctions, or send troops to suppress me?" After a pause, the woman's face became more gloomy and cold. A group of shameless things. If you have the ability, come to me directly. I want to see how much ability you, a group of weak chickens, have. How can you compare with the 49 heavenly tribulations? His words were even more rude and unreasonable than what Supreme Tianyu had said. They were so domineering that the expressions of many people changed. Was this the declaration of the Spirit Sword sect to shed all pretense of cordiality? What did they take down there that made them so fearless? What was going on with the treasure map of the 10 million immortal treasures? However, people were more concerned about Feng Yin's reaction. No matter how harsh Wang Wu's words were, she couldn't represent Lingjian's school after all. Moreover, everyone knew that this woman was unreliable. Unexpectedly, Feng Yin sighed and turned to Wang Lu. I'm afraid the reason for this is not as simple as some people think. 10 million immortal treasures, even if the earth veins of the continent dried up, it still can't afford it. What exactly is going on, Wang Lu? You can say it. Wang Lu smiled. My experience in the lower levels is complicated and bizarre, and this inheritance of 10 million immortal treasures also has complicated twists and turns. It's like this. Then, Wang Lu tirelessly talked about the principle of these 10 million immortal treasures. Of course, questions about the existence of Sword Devil Zhong Xingming, Primal Chaos Heaven-Splitting Sword and Dixian were naturally avoided. However, the principle of the 10 million tombs alone was enough to attract everyone's attention. The brilliance of Dixian's method was completely beyond imagination, distorting the Tao of heaven and earth to create an inexhaustible and ever-changing treasure vault. If they didn't see this with their own eyes, it would really be hard to believe. However, at this time, if it wasn't without a doubt, who could make up such a vivid story? In the long silence and shock, someone soon realized the next problem. If what Wang Lu said was true, that these 10 million immortal treasures could only be obtained by continuously going deep into the tombs and experiencing tests, then there was actually no possibility for Lingjian school to monopolize this inheritance, and there was no need for it. Even if the 10 million tombs were included in their territory, how many could Lingjian school excavate? Lingjian school was famous for its sparse population, and there were so many treasures on this star map that even if Lingjian school was given hundreds or thousands of years, they still wouldn't be able to excavate all of them. Since there was no need to monopolize it, then, thinking of this, many of the elders' expressions changed again, but not because of surprise, but because of embarrassment. If they couldn't monopolize it, of course they had to share it. These 10 million immortal treasures were obviously something that Lingjian school had already decided to share with the other sections. In the end, before the other party finished talking, they couldn't wait to snatch it. It was no wonder that Wang Wu was so angry. This kind of feeling was probably, Wang Lu said coldly, the feeling of being masked and raped by the bridegroom the day before the wedding. Wang Wu clicked her tongue. Your analogy is really deep to the bone. Humph, as a man, how can I not go deep? At this time, even Supreme Tianyu was stunned speechless. His hand on the demon knife opened and closed a few times, but in the end, he let go. Although he was rude and unreasonable, he wasn't without a plan. At this point, how could he find an excuse to start a war? He could only remain silent. After a moment, the long-bearded elder of Kunlun sect opened his mouth to smooth things over. I think, there were indeed many misunderstandings before, but the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League are of the same breadth and branch. There is no misunderstanding that can't be solved. Wang Lu sneered. Tisk tsk, the lubricant boy who delivered the lubricant after the event is here. Wang Wu sneered. Tisk tsk, you think that just because you lubricated it doesn't count as rape? Wang Lu sneered. Tisk tsk, that door has been destroyed, happiness can never come back. Wang Wu wanted to continue to sneer, but was helplessly interrupted by Feng Yin. Enough, you too. Chapter 274. In the end, the four sects didn't really shed all pretense of cordiality. Although the non-phase master and disciple's cynical ridicule made the other three sects' elders completely embarrassed, at least they managed to maintain the situation at the level of verbal bombardment rather than a more tragic level. Lingjian's school didn't have the intention to shed all pretense of cordiality, because the next thing to do was a big thing, which needed the support of the other sects, especially Xingjing's sect. Just like everyone had realized, this huge treasure trove was not something that could be monopolized by any one sect, and it was even not something that could be monopolized by the four sects that were present. According to the star chart, there were thousands upon thousands of immortal treasures. And in theory, since this place was formed by Dixian's reversal of the world's main path, the immortal treasures were, in fact, inexhaustible. The so-called thousands upon thousands was not the total number of immortal treasures, but the number that could be mined at the same time. In other words, if there were thousands upon thousands of elite adventurers comparable to Wang Lu, it was possible to mine thousands upon thousands of immortal treasures at once. Of course, even if they searched the entire Wanxian League, how many people like Wang Lu could they find? This kind of immortal abode was absolutely not something that could be monopolized by any one sect. Moreover, there was not much meaning in monopolizing it. The benefits that you could get would not increase, instead, it would cause the world's cultivators to lose a great opportunity. This was completely harming others without benefiting oneself. Once the news was leaked, it would instead provoke the world's resentment. Therefore, the solution to this matter was to share it. Not only with the three sects of Xingjing sect, Kunlun sect, but also with the more than 1,300 sects of the Wanxian League, Shaoqi sect. Lingjian school intended to announce this news to the world. Of course, this was not out of any eagerness for justice, but to seek a greater benefit. As long as one put in effort, it was possible to obtain immortal treasures in an immortal level tomb, which was tantamount to immortal abode, enough to make the world's people scramble like ducks. And once the world's people scramble like ducks, an excellent opportunity to get rich would follow. Throughout the ages, the richest person had always been the one who distributed the wealth, not the one who created it. Instead of risking one's life and diligently digging in the millions of tombs, it was better to directly summon all the cultivators in the world to enter the tombs and dig out the treasures. Then, they would take a cut from it and enjoy the fruits of others' labor. The percentage of the cut wouldn't be too much. As long as they took 10% of the harvest, it would accumulate into an abnormally rich harvest. Of course, there had to be an explanation for this 10% cut. Otherwise, it would be considered robbery. Perhaps everyone could accept it in the beginning, but not long after, they would question why they would want a share of the treasures that they had worked so hard and risked their lives to obtain. However, this problem was not difficult to solve. The star map that Wang Lu projected was the best reason. We have a map. Do you want it? If you don't want it, you have to promise me a tenth of the profits. TSK, your courage is commendable. In this dangerous place where you can die at any time, one more piece of information means one more chance of survival. Are you sure you don't want it? As for the act of buying a copy of the map and casually spreading it, first of all, it was against the harmony of heaven. Reading it was one thing, but spreading a pirated copy could easily lead to a divine tribulation, so usually, no one dared to try it. Secondly, the structure of Dixian's tomb was not fixed. In addition to the initial ancient sword tomb, the rest of the tombs had to be built according to the situation of these cultivators. The test checkpoints, guardian monsters, and the final reward were all randomly generated. Thus, the content of the map was naturally not fixed. In essence, it was more like a set of exquisite calculations. As long as the situation of the cultivators who entered the tomb was inserted into the map, one could roughly speculate the situation that might be encountered in the tomb. The tens of millions of tombs that Dixian built had tens of millions of different calculations. Wang Lu only sold one map at a time, so simple duplication was meaningless. However, these were only technical issues. To truly unify the resources of the 9 regions' immortal cultivation world and establish such a tax mechanism, relying on one sect alone was absolutely not enough. Especially with the sparse population of Lingjian School, it was even more powerless. Therefore, it must pull in Xingjing sect, the leader of the immortal cultivation world. Of course, Kunlun Immortal sect and 10,000 Arts sect, the 2 sects of the 5 uniques, couldn't be left behind. Otherwise, in practice, if these 2 giants kept hindering them, they wouldn't be able to play. Of course, the above was just the basic idea. To really establish such a set of game rules, it needed a lot of work. In short, let's set up a special committee first. During the silence, the one with the highest status, Feng Yin, opened his mouth. With our 4 sects as the leader, along with Royal Soldier sect, Myriad Appearance sect, and other top-rank sects, we will jointly form a special committee to deal with all matters in this underground immortal tomb. The committee will not be under the jurisdiction of any organization and will operate independently. The number of members will be no more than 50. There will be 5 standing committee seats, as well as a chairman. The term of office and election method are to be determined. However, the first chairman will be me, and later on, it will be rotated. When these words came out, the elders of the other 3 sects looked at each other in dismay. They were not in a hurry to answer. For this kind of strategic matter, they couldn't make a decision on behalf of their sections. Thus, they had to use their own magical ability and immediately contact their respective sect leaders. A moment later, the leaders of the other sects sent back a message. They had no objection to Feng Yin Daoist Master's proposal. After all, Feng Yin Daoist Master's proposal was generally fair. Although directly taking the position of the first chairman seemed a bit tyrannical, after all, the core part of the whole set of game rules was owned by Lingjian School. Thus, it was natural for them to have more benefits. It was believed that in the future, among the 50 committee members, although Lingjian School had the least number of people, the proportion of the committee members would not be lower than any other sect. Of course, the specific establishment of the committee still needed to be discussed separately. However, this idea has been approved by 4 of the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League, so it was basically passed. The next question was, what about the key? No matter how excited everyone was to think about the future, the premise of all this was that everyone at least had to be able to enter the tomb. Now that the key to open the door was unfortunately lost, if they couldn't find it, no matter what they said, it would be useless. This was also the main reason why Lingjian School wanted to unite all the sections. After more than 10,000 years, to find an unknown key was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Even Feng Yin Daoist Master's star diffraction technique couldn't find any clues. Thus, they could only widely mobilize the masses and cast a net to catch it. According to Sword Demon, the key itself was an immortal treasure. It shouldn't be an ordinary item on the continent. Moreover, its magical power was related to the creation of heaven and earth, so it was very likely to be a spacetime immortal treasure. But even so, only a few sects could unite and mobilize all the immortals in the world to have a hope of finding the key in a short period of time. Similarly, the search for the key was also a matter of competition and cooperation. It was true that everyone worked together, but the party who obtained the key in the end would undoubtedly have a larger share in the committee. And this was also one of the reasons why Feng Yin Daoist Master didn't ask for too much of the committee's authority. If Lingjian School had already obtained the key at this time, how could they be satisfied with a limited term of office as the chairman of the committee? It was reasonable to have at least 3 out of 5 standing committee members. However, since they didn't have the key, they would have to wait until they found the key. Of course, everyone knew that in the process of looking for the key, Lingjian School certainly had a certain advantage in clues, but the advantage was not obvious. Otherwise, wouldn't it be better for them to conceal the information about the key? After the important matter was settled, the people of the four sects went their separate ways and arranged their disciples to look for a needle in a haystack. The Lingjian school also cleaned up the mess, and the elders led their disciples back to the mountain to recuperate. In this experiential learning in the ancient sword tomb, Lingjian school was undoubtedly the biggest winner. In addition to the untapped Dixian inheritance, the several successor disciples also obtained great benefits. Needless to say, Wang Lu and Zhu Shiyao, although their injuries were not light, after their injuries were healed, their cultivation base could advance by leaps and bounds. Lu Li, on the other hand, obtained a suitable high-rank spiritual treasure flying sword. Her harvest was no less than that of Wang Lu and Zhu Shiyao. Although there were many flying swords in her hands, their level was actually not high, they were just magical treasures. Because spiritual treasure usually had its own spirituality. However, Lu Li's brilliant sword heart had extremely harsh requirements for the characteristics of the flying sword, which very few spiritual treasures could meet. Although Lingjian school searched in every possible way, they never found a suitable one. Therefore, they simply replaced it with a lower-level magical treasure. However, this time, Lu Li was self-reliant. After Wang Lu went deep into the last level, she was bored, so she casually wandered around the ancient sword tomb. If Wang Lu was still here, he would certainly scold her for courting death. However, perhaps her luck was really deep. In a remote stone room, she actually found a broken sword that seemed to have been abandoned for a long time. When she picked up the sword actually bloomed with dazzling brilliance, revealing the nature of a high-rank spiritual treasure, which was highly compatible with Lu Li. Later, after being identified by the sect elders, it was discovered that it was the famous sword of the sword demon, Skybreaker. It was originally an immortal treasure, however, in the process of resisting the 4 in 9 divine tribulations, the sword spirit perished and the sword body was damaged. Thus, it was brought to the ancient sword tomb by its master to be slowly nurtured by the power of the feng shui line. After 10,000 years, the sword body has basically been repaired. Although the sword spirit could not be reborn, it didn't affect the quality of the flying sword. Moreover, it just met Lu Li's requirement of a blank flying sword. Although the quality of this immortal sword has not been fully restored, as long as Lu Li diligently refined it, sooner or later, it would be able to regain its former glory. Its actual value was far higher than the one that Zhu Shiyao previously obtained. It was truly a priceless treasure. Regarding this, even Wang Lu was slightly envious. Although he certainly wouldn't covet Lu Li, he couldn't help but want to borrow it and play with it. Lu Li, of course, agreed. Okay, you can play with Ah Miao. Wait a minute, what's Ah Miao? Lu Li said, it's this flying sword. Master said that since the original sword spirit is no longer here, it's equivalent to a new flying sword. So, as its master, I have to give it a new name. So it's called Ah Miao? Wang Lu was speechless. He shook his head and took the Ah Miao sword from Lu Li. The reason why he borrowed the sword from Lu Li was mainly to comprehend the essence of the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword from this sword of the sword demon. Now that the sword spirit was no longer here, perhaps the harvest would be very limited, but it was better than nothing. However, as soon as his palm touched the hilt, he felt a burst of dizziness in his head, as if he was hit by a heavy hammer. He couldn't think at all. Wang Lu hastily threw the sword back to Lu Li and asked, "What's the matter with this sword?" Lu Li said, "Master said that once this sword is refined, it will be connected with my mind, and the sword and I become one. Although I don't quite understand what it means, it should be a good thing, right?" "No, your master's meaning is actually very simple. This sword, in addition to you, if other people hold it, their IQ will drop." You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.